Hey guys, tonight we're taking you somewhere hazy, sticky and potentially full of regrets, because tonight we're getting absolutely irresponsibly wasted in medieval times, like barely holding your own tankard kind of wasted. You're about to discover how the past partied, puked and passed out long before light beer and Uber rides, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not because of the violence, though there's some, but because hygiene is optional. Everyone's wasted before noon and you might get trampled by a horse on your way home. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, I'm not going to beg. Also tell me your city and what time it is while you're watching. Are we talking cozy midnight or 4 AM chaos scroll? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyelids crack open to darkness and the faint sound of dripping water. A chicken pecks at your boot. You're lying on hay, possibly in someone's stable, possibly not even in your own town. Your mouth tastes like sour wine. And pickled onion, your head is doing that medieval drum circle thing, and there's something sticky on your cheek that you pray is beer. You sit up, the sun hasn't risen, but a pale blue light leaks over the horizon like someone forgot to blow out the sky's candle. Your doublet is on backwards. Your purse is suspiciously light. There's a fresh cut on your forearm you don't remember earning. Nearby, someone snores with commitment. Could be a friend, could be a stranger. Could be both in medieval terms. Welcome to the morning after. Last night was a blur, but fragments come back. There was a tavern, or maybe two. There were drinks, many of them cloudy and warm. Someone played a hurdy-gurdy. Someone else was very insistent that you dance the fish jig on a table. You did. Badly. You may have serenaded a noblewoman with a dirty limerick about turnips. You might have challenged a monk to a wrestling match. You vaguely remember someone yelling, "To the stocks with him!" But maybe that was just part of the song. Your body aches like you've been in a bar fight with a goat, which upon further inspection of hoofprints on your jerkin might be accurate. You're not alone in this medieval haze. Getting wasted isn't just a side effect of poor decision-making here. It's a community tradition, a cultural pastime, and weirdly, a public service. When the water's full of mystery illnesses and the roads are full of bandits, sometimes a drink or five is just how you survive the day. Medieval drinking isn't reserved for the reckless, it's expected. Ale for breakfast, wine with lunch, stronger stuff if it's a feast day, and every other day is suspiciously a feast day. Still woozy, you stagger toward a town, or at least toward a firelight flickering in the distance. You pass a man asleep on a wheelbarrow, and a donkey nibbling what appears to be a tax document. The air smells of smoke, yeast, and faint regret. As you walk, memories start to stitch together. There was that alehouse with the wonky ceiling beams, the innkeeper's wife who kept filling your mug and laughing at your noble accent, the travelling bard who promised to teach you a drinking song if you let him borrow your boots you no longer appear to own. Then that thing with the ferret. You're not ready to process the ferret yet. A few more steps and you reach the village square. A couple of the town's early risers eye you with the exhausted disapproval of people who know you'll regret this more than they do. A baker's apprentice offers you a burnt heel of bread, not out of kindness but because she doesn't want you throwing up near her flour sacks. You nod your thanks, sit on a crate and slowly, with all the dignity of a mud-covered court jester, nibble your way back to life. And as you sit there, the question forms slow and smoky. What the hell happened? To answer that, you'll have to rewind. Not just to last night, but way back. Because drinking, getting drunk, and the whole messy business of medieval merriment is a story tangled in monks and mystics, wenches and warlords, peasants and poets. It's sticky with honey mead and slurred Latin blessings. It's got public brawls, illegal distilleries, and enough questionable substances to make a modern pharmacist cry. And somehow, despite the chaos, or maybe because of it, this whole boozy tradition shaped how people related to power, piety, and each other. Historically speaking, what you experienced last night was pretty typical. One fact, in 14th century England, ale consumption could hit 1-2 gallons per person per day, kiddies included. It wasn't just a vice, it was a calorie source. You didn't drink to get drunk, at least not officially. You drank to stay upright. But here's a quirky bit. A lot of folks used to rate taverns by their ale poles. Long sticks with a bunch of tankards or leaves hanging from them. The more elaborate the pole, the sketchier the place. Why? Because a flashy poll meant the inn had to overcompensate for terrible drinks. You probably stumbled into one of those places. Now, about that scholarly debate. Historians still argue how wasted people actually got. Some say most medieval drinks were so low in alcohol that you'd have to chug a barrel to black out. Others argue that since people were drinking all day, blood alcohol levels basically hovered in a permanent buzz. You? Judging by the way your stomach just tried to leave your body, you're going with option B. As the sky turns to full morning, you rise from the crate. There's still hay in your hair and the bread has not settled well, but you've got questions, and you're ready to retrace your steps. Last night's chaos! It was just the tip of the tankard. The first thing you smell as you approach the thatched house on the edge of the village is smoke, thick and sweet, with an undercurrent of something yeasty and strange. The second thing is damp dog. The third is fermenting apples, sharp and clingy, hanging in the morning air like forgotten dreams. This is where it all begins, the brew house. Not some massive industrial operation with copper pipes and pristine barrels. This is someone's kitchen. Someone's smoky, soot-blackened, eternally damp kitchen, where beer is being born in a large cauldron bubbling over a fire that looks slightly possessed. You wipe a bit of last night's dried mead from your shirt sleeve and step inside, ducking the crooked wooden beam as you do. Instantly your eyes sting. There's barely any light except for the fire and a few slits of sun slicing through wall cracks. A woman stands at the hearth, sleeves rolled, hair tied back with a cloth that's probably soaked with steam and old yeast. She doesn't glance at you, just says, "You're early, no more samples until the mash sets." You nod like you understand what mash is, even though you absolutely do not. You're just here to figure out how this whole getting medievally drunk process starts, and it turns out it starts humbly. Brewing in this time and place isn't some specialty trade, it's everyday survival. The average household is expected to brew its own ale, especially since water, as we've noted, is like playing intestinal roulette. So that means women, housewives, widows, nuns, even the occasional street-smart orphan, are usually the ones making the daily batch. She gestures with a ladle to a large wooden tub bubbling in the corner. "That's yesterday's small beer," she says. "Barely has a kick, but keeps the little ones quiet." You nod again, trying not to picture medieval toddlers knocking back mugs before nap time. Small beer, low alcohol, watery, just enough ferment to kill the bad stuff. It is the drink of the masses. It's what you start your day with if you're a field labourer, a monk, or a particularly thirsty goose. But then there's the stronger stuff. That's what last night was full of. Mead, ale, cider, sometimes wine, if you were rich, and sometimes things that didn't have names, just colours and side effects. You lean in as she lifts the lid off the main brewing pot. Steam rises like a ghost. The grain's been soaking in hot water, releasing its sugars, turning the whole thing into a warm, frothy soup called the mash. Later she'll strain it, add yeast, and let the fermenting magic begin, or rot. Sometimes it's a thin line. And here's your historical fact for the day. Hops weren't always part of the brew. In much of early medieval Europe, people used a mix of herbs called grute, things like yarrow, rosemary and heather, not just for flavour, but to preserve the beer and possibly make it, let's say, more entertaining. You drink too much grute ale and you might see angels or hear your dead uncle singing, or, if the brewer got the herbs wrong, just straight up die. Brewing wasn't science, it was sorcery with domestic flair. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you notice bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling like upside-down broomsticks. Some of them look innocent enough. Lavender, maybe sage. But others, they whisper weirdness. One's got a warning scratched above it in what appears to be Latin and goat blood. That one, that's probably not for flavour. "Smells like trouble," a voice behind you rasps. You jump and turn to see a hunched man, probably a brewer's assistant or possibly a neighbourhood ghoul, shuffling in with a sack of barley. He smiles with no teeth. Had a batch last year, turned every man at the table blind for a day and a half. Best birthday I ever had. You make a mental note not to drink anything without watching it get poured. There's a quirky fact for you. In some villages, ale tasters were real jobs. Basically, professional drink samplers who'd go around tasting batches to make sure no one was brewing up gut rot disguised as refreshment. It was an honoured position, though it probably involved a lot of involuntary vomiting and long nights swearing at demons that weren't there. Of course, even with tasters and recipes scrawled on parchment, brewing wasn't consistent. Your mug might be fruity and smooth one day, then sour and explosive the next, which means every drink was a gamble, and you've been gambling hard apparently, A scholarly debate still floats among historians like foam on a tankard. How much of this daily brew was actually alcoholic enough to affect behaviour? Some argue most brews were too weak to do much, but others suggest that fermentation techniques, especially with wild yeast and strong root, could produce ale strong enough to make you dance on rooftops. Based on the thudding behind your eyes, you believe the rooftop theory. The woman ladles you a sip from the new batch. It's hot and sweet, not yet alcoholic. "Give it 3 days," she says, "then it'll bite back." You nod politely and step back into the air, which now smells cleaner but also colder. Outside, the village is waking up. A blacksmith hammers out a rhythm that matches your hangover's heartbeat. Children run barefoot, laughing, one holding what appears to be your missing left boot. You let it go. You think back to last night and realise you probably drank at least 3 different kinds of medieval liquor. One was warm and spiced, probably mead. Another was cloudy and thick, ale, no doubt. And the third might have been someone's homemade plum brandy or a wizard's prank. It burned all the way down and made your ears ring. You're not even mad, just curious. But now, your curiosity has a mission. You want to know where you drank it, who made it, and why half your hair is singed. So you do what any responsible adult in a vaguely post-apocalyptic middle-aged village would do. You start asking around, because it's time to retrace your steps back to the alehouse. The alehouse isn't far, just down the muddy path from the brewhouse, tucked between the tanner's yard and a suspiciously loud chicken coop. The door is warped, the windows are greasy, and the sign above it flaps lazily in the breeze, depicting something that could be a boar or a badly drawn dog depending on your level of sobriety. You push the door open and step into a low-ceilinged cave of noise, smells, and the thick emotional hangover of people pretending they're not hungover. Inside it's dim and hazy. Not the charming candle-lit haze you imagine from medieval romance stories, but the honest kind. Smoke from the hearth mixing with last night's sweat and this morning's bacon. A few patrons are already here, hunched over wooden mugs, faces red with either cold or regret. One man is eating a bowl of what might be porridge or just hot beer bread in defeat form. Another is clearly asleep, forehead flat against the table, hand still gripping his tankard like a war trophy. This is where you were last night. You recognise the stain on the bench, red and sticky, possibly wine, possibly blood, probably both. A barmaid spots you and gives you that tired, familiar smirk, the kind that says, "Ah yes, the idiot returns." She walks over, flicking a rag across a mug that's been cleaned for exactly 0 seconds. "You owe me for a broken stool, 2 spilled pitchers, and singing over the priest," she says, "but you tipped well, so I'll let you live." You smile awkwardly and ask what you drank. She snorts. "Everything but the candle wax, though I'm not ruling that out. Started with ale, moved to cider, ended with something that glowed blue and smelled like burnt thyme. You called it wizard juice. Then you tried to baptise yourself in the wash barrel. Right, that tracks. Alehouses like this one were the pulse of the village. Not just bars, community centres. They were where people gathered to talk gossip, trade rumours, eat terrible stew, and occasionally stab each other with blunt knives over insults involving someone's mother and a goat. In most towns, the alehouse was the poor man's court, church and comedy club. Rich folks had banquets and cellars. You had benches and slot buckets. One historical fact stands out. Alehouses were so central to life that in 1604 there were over 200 official alehouses just in London's city limits. That's a lot of opportunities to forget your name, and while you're not in London right now, the culture's the same. If you want to hear news, hire labour, flirt poorly, or win a pig in a dice game, this is where you go. And there's more happening here than just drink. You look around and see the same cast from last night in different stages of recovery. There's the toothless shepherd who bet you 3 turnips you couldn't chug a mug without blinking. Spoiler, you blinked and lost your dignity. There's the fiddler who played until his strings snapped. There's even the old widow who cackled every time you mispronounced chamber pot. You take a seat and notice the table's top is carved with years of desperate poetry, bad drawings, and cryptic names like Rory the Wet and Maud Who Screams. This place has history etched into it, both literally and spiritually sticky. A man sits down beside you. He's huge, smells like smoke and sheep, and you vaguely remember dancing with him. He grins. "You owe me a song," he says, slapping the table. "You promised you'd compose one about my feet." You try to sidestep that conversation, but he launches into a tale about your shared drinking game involving something called Blind Bishop's Dice, which you clearly lost multiple times. You made it to the goat ride finale, which by his tone was either majestic or deeply embarrassing. Here's your quirky fact. Medieval tavern games were the chaos engine of many nights. People played dice with animal bones, chess if they could afford it, and drinking contests with rules that made no sense, and usually ended in someone marrying a potato sack. Some games were just excuses to drink faster, others elaborate systems of forfeits and public humiliation. You apparently played both kinds. There's a table in the corner where a man is trying to explain the rules of a game called Shoes and Spiders. No one knows the rules, not even him, but he's got a crowd, and that's half the point. Medieval alehouses weren't quiet places to drink, they were performance spaces. The louder you were, the better your story, the more free drinks you'd get. A man could live a good life as a travelling tale spinner, paid entirely in ale and suspicious stew. But there was risk here too. The alehouse was also where fights broke out. Insults flew like arrows, and more than one patron ended the night with a bruised ego and a broken nose. And here's where the scholarly debate comes in. Some argue that the alehouse was a place of camaraderie and brotherhood, where the poor could blow off steam and feel equal, even for a moment. Others point out that it was a pressure valve, controlled chaos allowed by the authorities to prevent actual rebellion. Keep the peasants drunk, and maybe they won't riot. You sip a mug of weak cider, blessedly fresh and not glowing, and think about the duality of this place. It's both safe and dangerous, comforting and chaotic. It's the one spot in town where everyone's welcome and no one's safe from humiliation. The barmaid passes by again, shaking her head. "You serenaded a dog," she says. "Was it impressed?" you ask. "It peed on your boot." Fair. There's laughter behind you now. Someone's reciting last night's best insults. Your name is mentioned once or twice, mostly followed by the word bless or idiot. You take another sip. The cider is tart, like biting into an apple and getting smacked with a stick of wood. Still, it's doing something to your brain. Something good. Outside, the sun is high. A bell tolls in the distance. You've gotten the lay of the land, remembered some of your misdeeds, and gathered intel. Next stop, Nobility, because your night didn't start here. No, your first drink somehow was in a hall with tapestries, silver goblets, and a man in fur-lined slippers shouting about boar pies. You don't know how you got invited to a noble banquet, but you're going to find out, and you're bringing a hangover with you. The nobleman's manor sits on a low hill just outside the village, not so much towering over it as observing with the amused disdain of someone who's never had to eat turnips for 5 straight winters. The path leading to the house is muddy but raked, which in this century basically means someone made an effort to kick the dung to the side. A pair of geese patrol the gate like tiny, furious sentinels. You eye them warily. They remember you from last night. And judging by the way one hisses and lunges at your shin, you may have insulted their family. After a brief, undignified sprint to the manor door, you're greeted by a lanky young servant who looks at you like he's not sure whether to let you in or throw a bucket of water at you. But then recognition dawns. "Ah," he says flatly, "the table dancer." You sigh. Of course you were the table dancer. The servant steps aside with the air of someone who's seen worse. His lordship is nursing his own contemplation, he says, leading you down a dim corridor that smells faintly of roast meat and spilled hypocrisy. The great hall is enormous by village standards. Stone floors, massive hearth, tapestries depicting battles no one remembers, and a long wooden table that looks like it could seat a small army, or a large extended family determined to argue over inheritance. Right now, though, it's mostly empty, save for a few bleary-eyed nobles and an overturned platter of what was once a duck. You're hit with the sensory flashback before you even sit down. Candles blazing, goblets sloshing, laughter bouncing off the stone walls like arrows off a drunk knight's armour. This was where the night began, the beginning of your descent into medieval madness. You remember the music, lutes and hand drums. You remember the wine, red, potent, poured by the gallon. And you remember someone toasting to the moon loudly before challenging a bishop to an arm wrestling match. That might have been you. Here's the thing about noble banquets. They weren't about eating, not really. Food was part of it, sure, but the main course was spectacle. You don't just arrive, chew on a turkey leg and leave. You perform. You flirt, gossip, make declarations about chivalry and mortality that sound profound until you fall into the soup. And historically these feasts could go on for hours, even days. One real banquet in 13th century England featured over 400 oxen, 300 sheep, and enough wine to float a canoe. The poor watched from the sidelines, the monks tried to look disapproving, and the nobles, they got plastered. A noblewoman you half remember approaches, her dress wrinkled, her headpiece slightly askew. She studies you. "Ah yes," she says, sipping from her silver cup. "You recited a poem about your left elbow. It was brave." You thank her, unsure what else to do, and she wanders off humming a drinking song. You realise you can still taste last night's wine in your mouth. A fruity, throat-scorching blend that probably cost more than your entire wardrobe. And that's another thing. Wine was expensive. Imported, taxed, precious. Nobles drank it as a status symbol. The poor drank ale because it was what you made at home. But when a noble hosted a feast, they poured wine like it was water and expected you to drink until you either complimented the host's daughter or passed out in a potted plant. You're beginning to suspect you did both. A platter of cold meat sits at the table's edge. A knight in partial armour gnaws on a rib with the intensity of someone trying to forget. He nods at you. "You're the one who tried to duel the jester, Source," he says. "With a spoon." You chuckle nervously. "Who won?" He shrugs. "Hard to say. You both ended up hugging and crying about your fathers?" "Seems right." The noble host finally enters, wrapped in a robe that looks like it's made of velvet and self-delusion. His eyes are bloodshot, his voice hoarse. "Ah, the poet of elbows," he declares. "Come, drink with me again. If we must suffer the morning, let us suffer together." You decline politely. He frowns, then drinks in your honour anyway. The goblet he holds is encrusted with fake jewels and possibly chicken grease. That doesn't stop him. Here's your quirky fact. At noble feasts, people drank not just to enjoy the party, but to show loyalty. Toasting was serious business. You had to toast the host, the king, the church, and sometimes the animal you were eating. It was a game of political etiquette. Mess it up and you might be exiled. Or worse, publicly mocked in a drinking song that would follow you forever. And here's the scholarly debate. Some argue these feasts were dangerous political theatres where ambition clashed over wine-stained tables. Others think they were harmless rituals of excess, a pressure valve for people too rich to be bored. The truth? Probably both. Somewhere between the roast boar and the fifth toast, alliances were made, affairs began, and someone definitely ended up vomiting into a tapestry. You scan the room, trying to piece together more of the night. You remember dancing on the table, yes, but also being sent outside, yes, banished, gently but firmly, after trying to toast the eternal power of cheese. Someone had whispered about an alehouse nearby, more earthy in its atmosphere. You'd followed them out, determined to mix with the common folk. And mix you did. But before you leave the manor, you spot one final memory on the wall. A painting, still half finished, depicting last night's feast. It's awful. Off-scale, weird expressions, and yet, there you are. A small figure in the background, raising a goblet high, one foot on the table, face alight with the drunken certainty. The noble host nods solemnly. "I commissioned it to capture the moment of your passion." You feel many things. Pride, horror, admiration, mostly nausea. You thank him, step back out into the daylight, and blink at the brightness. You've had the village ale. You've stumbled through noble wine. And yet, there's one more layer to your boozy descent that's still foggy. Something darker, stranger, the drink with herbs, the glowing one, the one someone whispered might have been enchanted or cursed. Next stop, a visit to the edge of the woods, where the brews aren't just intoxicating, they're borderline sorcery. You follow the trail out of town where the trees start to lean in like they've got secrets and the light filters down in long green fingers. The path narrows, the grass gets wetter. There's a smell now. Sweet, herbal and sharp, like thyme mixed with something that might also strip paint. Somewhere nearby, a raven calls out once, as if to say, "Really? You're going there?" You are, because you need answers about the bottle that glowed. The one with the floating herbs and the strange aftertaste that made you temporarily fluent in Old Norse. You drank it after leaving the noble's hall, somewhere out here. A shack in the woods. A woman in layers of wool and necklaces made from bones and beetles. A drink that made the moon spin sideways. You arrive at a moss-covered cottage nestled so snugly into the forest it seems grown, not built. A wooden sign hangs above the crooked door. It reads, "Elixirs, potions and general relief," in shaky lettering, half worn off. Someone's drawn a smiley face beneath it, complete with fangs. You knock. Nothing happens for a beat, then a metallic clatter and a string of curses echo from inside. The door creaks open to reveal a woman with wild grey hair, one eyebrow singed clean off and a gaze that pins you like a frog on a dissection table. "Well," she says, "if it isn't last night's philosopher king." You try to apologise for whatever you did. She waves you off. You paid in coin, compliments, and a sketch of a dog labelled God. Good enough for me. She lets you in. The interior is equal parts apothecary, tavern, and chaos. Dried herbs dangle from every beam. Jars filled with liquids in unnatural colours line the shelves. One jar contains what looks suspiciously like a toe. A small black cat watches you from the rafters, clearly judging. You sit on a stool that squeaks under your weight and ask the big question, "What was that drink?" She grins and reaches for a jug wrapped in cloth and string. "This," she says, unwrapping it like a sacred relic, "is moonbrew, my own recipe. Mead base, wormwood, rosemary, and a dash of, let's say, inspiration." You remember now the warmth of the sip, of the moment your ears felt too big for your head, the way everyone's faces got slightly more medieval. It wasn't just strong, it was weird. In a good way, mostly. Here's a historical fact to chew on while you eyeball the floating bits in your drink. Medieval herbal alcohols were everywhere, especially on the fringes of society. Monks had the good stuff, refined, documented, made for medicine. But out here, people brewed with what they had. Mugwort, henbane, juniper, even nightshade if they were feeling bold or homicidal. Some of these drinks cured headaches. Some cured your desire to live. It was all trial, error, and vibes. She offers you a fresh taste, for clarity, she says, but you politely decline. She pours herself a shot instead. "You talked about time last night," she says between sips. "Said the moon was just a drunk coin someone flipped too slow." You nod solemnly, pretending you remember that. "There was also a moment," she continues, "where you attempted to bless my cat and declared him Bishop of Boredom." The cat meows once, as if confirming the promotion. But let's get quirky for a second. In parts of Europe, people genuinely believed some brews had magical or medicinal powers. Love potions made from rose hips and honey wine. Aphrodisiacs involving ground antlers and ale. Even wartime soldiers drank courage draughts laced with herbs to chase away cowardice. No science, just hope and herbs. And in a world where the average dentist was also your barber and possibly your priest, you'd cling to any cure you could get, even if it came in a bubbling wooden mug. You glance around her shop again. One shelf is labelled memory, another regret. A third just says don't. There's a scholarly debate that touches this very scene. Some historians argue that the line between brewing and witchcraft was dangerously thin. Women who brewed strong herbal drinks, especially outside of guild systems, were often accused of sorcery. Others suggest that was just a convenient excuse to suppress female economic independence. Either way, being good at booze and botany could get you burned at the stake if you weren't careful. Your host clearly isn't worried. She winks and lifts a beaker to the sunlight streaming through the single cracked window. "Drink is language," she says. "A story in your blood. Sometimes it's comedy, sometimes it's confession." You believe her. There's a moment of silence as the two of you watch dust motes spin lazily in the beam of light. You try to remember how you even found this place last night. She answers without you asking. You were following the goat. Of course, the goat. You step back outside, head full of herbs, haunted by the vague sensation that your dreams tonight will smell like cloves. The forest feels different now, less ominous, more inviting, like the trees are in on some joke you'll never quite understand. You walk slower, more carefully, retracing your footprints from last night, when you left the noble hall bloated with goose and arrogance, stumbled through the woods and ended up here. You may have tried to flirt with a tree. The wind whispers through the leaves. Your stomach rumbles. Time to rejoin society. Maybe check if your shoes are still in the tavern rafters. But first you hear music. Faint, lilting, laughter. A crowd. That's right. After the moonbrew you didn't go home. You followed the sound of dice rolling and mugs clanking. The games were just getting started. The music grows louder with each step, a jaunty, slightly off-key tune carried on the wind. You follow it back into town, your boots squelching in the mud, your breath still tinged with the ghost of rosemary and regret. The path leads you to a cluster of buildings near the market square, where the air smells like fried dough and wood smoke, and something more pungent, something that smells exactly like spilled ale and bad decisions. The tavern is wider than the alehouse from earlier, and rowdier. This is where things went from gently tipsy to climbing onto tables while declaring your new allegiance to the Duck Kingdom. And you remember now the thrill of stepping into this space lit by low torches and crowded with voices. It was here that the drinking games began. Inside, the room pulses with life. Not refined noble merriment, no harpists or roast swans here, just men and women shoulder to shoulder, cheeks flushed, sleeves rolled up, mugs sloshing, and dice bouncing across sticky tables. Someone strums a lute near the hearth, fingers fumbling through chords, occasionally stopping to burp between verses. The tune is familiar. Probably something you sang along to last night, loudly, off-key, possibly while standing on a bench and proclaiming your mastery of goat poetry. You slide onto a bench beside a group huddled over a game that looks vaguely like dice, but also involves dried beans, and for some reason a chicken feather. "Back again," one of the players says, grinning. "You lost your belt in that round. We tied it to the cat." You look up. Sure enough, a ginger cat trots along the rafters, dragging your belt like a trophy. Games were at the heart of medieval tavern culture. They weren't just pastimes, they were rituals. Part skill, part luck, all chaos. The most common was dice, simple six-sided ones made from bone. The rules were murky, often made up on the spot. You think last night's game involved betting how many mugs you could balance on your head before passing out. You didn't win, but you were a crowd favourite, well, someone says. Here's your historical fact. Gambling in taverns was so rampant that authorities issued repeated bans and restrictions on it throughout the Middle Ages. In 1388, England even passed a law forbidding labourers from playing dice or cards except at Christmas. Naturally, everyone ignored it. You watch a pair of men arm wrestle, their faces red, hands trembling, mugs clattering dangerously close to the edge of the table. A pile of coins, along with a dagger, a spoon and someone's shoe, sits between them as the prize. When one finally wins, the loser smashes a mug in mock defeat and shouts, "I still have my dignity," which is immediately disproved by the crowd chanting, "Drink, drink, drink." A woman across the room lifts a clay jug and slams it down. "Who'll take me on at Bishop's Bounce?" she roars. A few brave souls cheer. You instinctively clutch your stomach. You played that game last night. You remember now, it involved chugging ale through a hollowed-out turnip and shouting Latin phrases between sips. You passed out mid-psalm. Here's your quirky fact for the evening. Medieval drinking games had names like Scot Ale, Snapdragon, and Pass the Boot. Some required skill, others required a total disregard for your well-being. One popular pastime was to pass a bowl of alcohol around the table, each person taking a sip and telling a story. If your story wasn't funny enough, or if you forgot it mid-sentence, you drank again. You forgot your own name halfway through and invented an identity as Sir Pickle of Crumbs. And while these games seem silly, even charming, there's a scholarly debate about their social role. Were they simple amusements, or a hidden system for testing loyalty, pecking order, even courtship? Some argue they were like auditions for trust. If you could handle the drink, handle the joke, handle the humiliation, you were part of the group. If not, well, the cat got your belt. One game starts up that you definitely remember. A coin toss game that required you to guess the outcome while spinning in place. Last night you spun so hard you fell into a barrel of pickled eggs and had to be fished out with a ladle. They made you wear the egg as a hat. You thought it was a crown. You ruled that tavern for 15 glorious salty minutes. And it wasn't just men. Women played, drank and dominated the tables. A middle-aged woman at the corner table tosses dice with the speed and focus of a professional assassin. She winks at you. "Still got my purse," she says, patting the coin bag you vaguely recognise as your own. You don't even try to get it back. Above it all, the music plays. The lute player sings a song that's half mockery, half elegy, recounting the tale of the elbow poet, who dared to challenge a monk to a drinking duel and then tripped on his own philosophy. The crowd loves it. You realise with a slow creeping certainty that you are the elbow poet. The tavern has a life of its own. Part carnival, part confessional. Everyone's performance is both real and exaggerated. You recall giving a toast to gravity last night before dramatically collapsing under the table. A stranger helped you up, poured you another mug, and told you with absolute sincerity that you were a revelation. You may have cried. Outside, the moon is rising again. You've spent the entire day patching together the puzzle of your medieval misadventure, and now you're right back where it all unravelled. Or maybe where it began. The tavern is getting louder. Someone's dancing with a chicken. Someone else is trying to convince the crowd that his pig can juggle. A man wearing only a hat is reciting love poetry to a ladle, and the games roll on. Dice clacking, mug slamming, rules changing with every laugh. You smile, drained but oddly content. You've survived the alehouse, the noble hall, the forest witch, and now the tavern circus. But the night isn't over. Not yet. There's a sound outside, a crowd, music, drums, laughter echoing through the square. You step out into the night and see torches flickering in the distance. The town's gathered. A celebration's begun. And if your memory serves, and honestly it probably doesn't, you're pretty sure this is where you tried to start your own religion. You follow the sound of drums into the night, past the tavern and through the square where torchlight paints flickering shadows across the cobblestones. The music is wild and urgent now. Hand drums thumping, wooden flutes shrieking, someone shaking what looks like a basket of bones in time to the beat. You round a corner and there it is, the heart of the revelry. A loose ring of townsfolk surrounding a makeshift table stacked with clay mugs, dice, bread crusts, and the occasional sweaty coin. People cheer, groan, howl, drunken chaos in its most joyful form. And you're headed straight for it, because your reputation is already here, waiting. The murmurs begin as you approach. It's him, the ladle prophet. Sir Elbow returns. You get a few claps on the back, a sarcastic bow, and a loaf of bread someone hands you like a scepter. It's mouldy, but you accept it graciously. Tonight's game is on a different level. The crowd parts just enough to let you see the table at the centre, and it's clear this isn't just fun anymore. It's serious business. There's betting, there are judges, there's a guy in a too-short tunic keeping score with a stick and a piece of cheese. You squint. Is that a monk at the far end? Why is he holding a chicken? You're too far in now to ask questions. You take your place at the edge of the table and someone shoves a mug into your hand. Cider. Spiced, lukewarm, faintly bitter. The kind that tastes like celebration and poor impulse control. You sip, and memories flood back. This table, these people, the strange and specific chaos of the night you lost your last clean sock in a wager about a fish's weight. You still haven't gotten it back. Tonight's game is called Drunkard's Bluff, and the rules change depending on who's losing. It involves dice, of course, but also shouting, swapping mugs when someone isn't looking, and reciting old rhymes about dead kings and unfortunate farm animals. You vaguely remember last night's final round ending, with you standing on the table, arms wide, shouting, "I declare the moon to be a biscuit." And now they expect an encore. You're mid-round, about to roll, when someone shouts, "Wait! No rolls without the hat!" A cheer erupts. A girl runs forward and slams down a massive felt hat covered in pins, feathers, and something vaguely crustacean. It reeks. It's glorious. It's the drunkard's hat, and apparently you wore it last night for the entire second act of your descent into madness. You put it on. The crowd roars. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Medieval tavern games and competitions often had elaborate customs. In some places, drinking guilds sprang up with their own songs, rules, rituals, even uniforms. Winners wore badges, ribbons, or hats that showed their boozy accomplishments. And in rare cases, these groups evolved into social clubs or trade alliances. Drinking wasn't just recreation. It was identity. You roll the dice. 7. A lucky number, apparently, because everyone groans. You win this round, which means you get to name a forfeit for someone else. You point at the chicken-holding monk and declare, "You must cluck your confession." The monk bows solemnly, lifts the chicken to his shoulder like a feathered parrot, and begins clucking dramatically while another man translates. He says he's sorry for baptizing a duck. The crowd erupts. The forfeit tradition goes on. One man has to crawl under the table and re-emerge with a new name. Another must balance a tankard on his head while reciting the village taxes in reverse. Your turn comes again, and someone shouts, "Sing the turnip song!" You don't know the turnip song, but you sing anyway, loudly, off-key. The lyrics are mostly, Turnips, turnips, noble and bold, and the rest is pure screaming. You bring the house down. Let's drop a quirky fact in the mix. Medieval drinking songs were not subtle. They often involved food, bodily functions, animals with attitudes, or nobles behaving badly. One popular tune compared a barmaid's smile to a spilt bucket of barley, and somehow that was a compliment. People sang to bond to distract themselves from disease and taxes, and because nobody could afford entertainment that didn't involve their own volume. You're somewhere in the middle of leading a chant about cheese-based warfare when you notice a man at the edge of the circle who doesn't seem amused. Tall, cloaked, arms crossed. Probably a constable, or worse, a morality warden. These guys existed in plenty of towns, tasked with policing bad behaviour. You try to act sober, which only makes you slur more aggressively. The man steps forward, but before he can say anything, a small child screams, "Biscuit King returns!" and dumps a mug of ale on your foot. The distraction works. The cloaked figure shakes his head and retreats, mumbling something about nothing but peasants and chaos. You're safe for now, and here's where the scholarly debate creeps in. Were these games and forfeits harmless fun or socially coded performances with hidden power dynamics? Some say they reinforced hierarchy, who could dish out humiliation and who had to take it. Others argue the tavern was a place where rules bent and anyone could rise, if only for one night, as the Biscuit King. Tonight, you're leaning toward the second option. Hours pass, the fire burns low, the crowd thins. You end up sharing the last of your cider with a man named Hump, who swears he was once a knight but now sells onions. You don't question it. He tells you you've got a gift. You've got the madness in you, he says, the holy kind. You thank him, unsure if you should be flattered or alarmed. The torches start to gutter. Someone's asleep in a barrel. Someone else is spooning a scarecrow that's been brought in from the field for company. You pull off the drunkard's hat and place it gently on the stool beside you. The cider is gone. Your voice is hoarse. You've made peace with whatever happened to your left sock. And then, from across the square, someone calls your name, or what they think is your name. It's slurred but familiar. You look up. It's a woman in a blue hood waving urgently. "You're late," she says. "The procession's already start." Procession. You groan, haul yourself upright and follow. Because, of course, last night didn't end here. There was a parade, and you were leading it. You follow the woman in the blue hood through the narrow side streets, your legs moving mostly out of habit and caffeine-shaped adrenaline. It's dark now, fully, deeply night, though torches light the path ahead in flickering bursts. Somewhere up ahead, drums are pounding again. Not quite music this time, more like ritual. You pass a man asleep on a sack of flour snoring gently into the cobblestones. A dog stares at you with the quiet judgment of someone who saw your turnip song performance and hasn't recovered. "Faster," the woman calls it over her shoulder. They've already passed the chapel, and then you see it. Just ahead, rounding the bend near the market cross. The procession. Not a solemn, religious one. No candles held reverently, no chanting monks or saints' relics. No, this is a street parade powered entirely by alcohol, poor decisions, and someone's stolen laundry line. At the front is a man wearing nothing but a bishop's mitre, sitting backward on a donkey. Behind him, two children bang spoons on a drum. A man in chainmail blows a horn that might actually be a watering can. Every few paces, someone yells a toast. You feel something click in your foggy memory. This was your idea. Last night, full of cider and moonbrew and unjustified confidence, you stood on a barrel and declared that the town needed a proper festival of joy and disobedience. You shouted about turning the world upside down, crowning a jester king, and marching through the streets to declare freedom from bedtimes and bathwater. They cheered. They lifted you on their shoulders, and then someone stole the bishop's hat and the donkey. Boom! Parade. You slip into the moving crowd. It's impossible to tell who's part of it, and who's just trying to get home and got swept up. Someone hands you a wooden staff wrapped in ribbons. You accept it without question. A child grabs your hand and insists you're the moon wizard. You don't argue. You just smile and raise the staff like it's Excalibur, and you are very much not wearing matching shoes. Here's your historical fact for the night. Medieval festivals often included processions that blurred the line between religion and riot. The most famous was the Feast of Fools, where low-ranking clergy or even random townsfolk would take over churches, mock official rituals, and generally turn the social order inside out. It was wild, messy and officially condemned, yet it happened every year anyway, because people needed it, desperately. And tonight, this is your feast of fools. You pass the baker's shop. A man in a sackcloth tunic tosses buns into the crowd like they're holy relics. One hits you square in the face, you eat it anyway. The music picks up. Someone's banging on a barrel with 2 ladles now, and a group of women in nightgowns joins in, waving garlic garlands like war flags. In the centre of the madness is the Jester King, a portly fellow with a pudding bowl haircut, wearing a robe made from stitched-together curtains. He sees you and cheers. "Elbow Prophet returns," he bellows. "Come, take your place beside me, co-ruler of moonlight and misrule." You're hoisted onto the donkey's back behind him. The donkey, to its credit, looks resigned. Someone hands you a goblet. You raise it, slosh wine down your front and yell, "To the kingdom of almost." The crowd explodes in cheers. Here's your quirky fact. In some towns, mock kings and queens were elected during festivals. Random citizens elevated for one night only to preside over absurd pageants and public games. These figures often made fake proclamations like declaring geese the new nobility, or insisting that everyone wear one boot backward for good luck. In theory, it was all satire. In practice, it was therapy with costumes. You and the Jester King ride through town like royalty of chaos. At one point, you're given a sceptre that is definitely just a ladle with a turnip stuck on the end. People kneel. A man proposes to his own reflection in a puddle. Someone paints a moustache on a sheep. And here comes the scholarly debate. Were these moments of inversion, a night of role reversal and ridiculousness, just harmless play? Or were they subtle critiques of the real power structures? Some scholars argue these festivals let people release tension, mocking their rulers in safe ways. Others believe they sowed seeds of actual rebellion, showing just how thin the veneer of order was. Tonight, riding a donkey and waving a vegetable wand, you're inclined to believe both. Eventually, the procession leads to the church steps. The real priest is inside, probably praying for forgiveness on behalf of the entire town. Outside, someone tries to ring the bell but only succeeds in pulling down a curtain rod from the adjoining house. You declare it an omen. The Jester King crowns a cabbage, Saint Lettuce of perpetual indulgence. Someone throws their shoes in the air. A jug of ale is passed like it's communion. You drink, it's terrible. Possibly vinegar, doesn't matter. And then, in the chaos, you remember the finale, the grand toast. Last night, this very spot, you gave a speech, a real one. You stood on the steps, raised your goblet, and with an impressive lack of coherence declared the town free from shame, sobriety, and clean linens. You made them repeat a vow, though no one recalls the words. You finished by lighting something on fire, possibly your sleeve. Tonight the crowd starts chanting, "Speech! Speech! Speech!" You raise your mug. You don't have a speech. You have a sore throat and a strong desire to lie down, but you find words anyway. "To the fools," you begin. "To the drunks, to the dancers and the bakers and the idiot who keeps calling that sheep, my lord." Laughter, cheers. Someone shouts, "That's his sheep wife. Show some respect." You continue. "To those who spilled their drinks but not their spirit. To those who fell down and stood back up and tried again, even if they had to crawl. Tonight, we are kings. Tonight, we are saints. Tonight, we are the reason the tavern floor will be sticky for a fortnight." The crowd roars, the donkey brays, the Jester King weeps softly. You finish your mug and bow, not a deep bow. You're still on the donkey. It's late now. The procession starts to break apart, people drifting back to homes, haylofts, or ditches. The music fades, the torches dim, and you slide off the donkey with the grace of a sack of oats. You're exhausted, thrilled, slightly singed, but as you turn to leave the square, you feel a hand on your shoulder. It's the barmaid from the alehouse. She grins. That was something. But you forgot one thing. "What's that?" you ask, blinking. She hands you a tankard. The drinking songs. Of course, and suddenly everyone's back. Gathering, humming, clapping. The next chapter of the night, singing until the sky forgets it was ever dark. It starts with a hum, low, uncertain, the way every good drinking song begins. One voice, then two, a few scattered claps, and before long the melody threads through the crowd like an old friend squeezing into the middle of the bench with a pint in each hand. You're standing near the dying embers of the parade. sticky with sweat cider, and something you really hope is not donkey-related, when the first chorus swells around you. "Oh, ale, sweet ale, you liar, you cheat, you promise us laughter, then knock out our feet." It's catchy, maybe a little too catchy. The kind of tune you'd swear you've heard in some past life, bellowed beside a bonfire while someone juggled turnips and another tried to play a harp with a fish. You find yourself singing, even though your throat feels like you gargled sand. Someone throws an arm around your shoulder. You're part of a chorus now, a rolling thunder of slurred harmony and unapologetic joy. And that's the thing about drinking songs. They're never meant to be good. They're meant to be loud. They're meant to be shared. And most importantly, they're meant to grow increasingly incoherent as the night goes on. The song transitions without warning to another. This one about a barmaid who could drink a night under the table and once married a barrel out of spite. You vaguely recall singing it last night. Only back then, you were standing on a chair and using a ladle as a microphone. Your performance was reportedly unforgettable, and not in the good way. The barmaid passes you another mug, this one filled with warm, foamy ale that tastes like last week's bread, but in a comforting way. You raise it with the crowd. "To the ladle! To the barmaid! To marrying barrels!" someone shouts. Here's your historical fact. Medieval drinking songs weren't just entertainment, they were oral records. Songs spread stories, gossip, local news and mockery. Illiterate townsfolk learned the names of kings, battles and scandals by singing them in alehouses. One verse about a particularly flatulent knight has outlived 3 royal dynasties and several major plagues. A group near the chapel starts a counter-song, something slower, sadder, involving lost love and a sheep named Margaret. A few people groan and try to drown it out with a round of roll the cask, which is mostly just shouting the words roll and cask over and over till someone falls over and has to be rolled themselves. This happens within minutes. You sit on a low stone wall soaking in the scene. The music is everywhere now, echoing off the buildings, mixing with laughter and the occasional hiccup. The songs aren't always in tune. The lyrics are often guessed at. Verses are repeated, mangled, rewritten on the spot. One song stops entirely when the lead singer forgets the third line and just starts chanting "potatoes, potatoes," until everyone joins in like it's the chorus. Here's your quirky fact. Many medieval taverns had songbooks, not written ones, but oral libraries maintained by regulars. Specific songs were tied to specific seats, mugs, or even days of the week. One French tavern reportedly had a rule that anyone who sat in the northeast corner had to sing the Ballad of the Three-Legged Cat before drinking. You'd honestly respect that tradition. You recognise a few faces in the crowd. There's the guy who lost a drinking contest to the jester's donkey, the woman who tried to sell you a bag of enchanted gravel, and the lute player from earlier, who is now playing the lute upside down while someone balances a mug on his head. He's surprisingly good. A scholarly debate lingers in the background. Not that you're in any mood for debates. Some historians argue drinking songs were a method of social cohesion, a way for diverse communities to bond through collective ritual. Others suggest they were subversive, allowing the powerless to mock the powerful in rhyme and rhythm without getting their heads removed. There's truth in both. Tonight, the crowd sings about a king with a cow's brain and a bishop who married a goose. Everyone laughs, no one dies. That's the power of a good song. At some point, the barmaid sits beside you, handing you a piece of slightly burnt pie and asking if you remember trying to convince the entire tavern that you were descended from Bacchus himself. You do not, but you nod anyway. It sounds like something you'd try after 2 jugs of mead and a head full of moonbrew. She laughs and joins the next song, her voice surprisingly clear. "My love is like an ale-soaked sock forgotten in the rain." Everyone groans, but in the good way. You join in on the second verse. The fire in the square has gone from roaring to glowing. People are sitting now, leaning against each other, sharing stories between verses. One man has fallen asleep mid-harmony and is snoring to the rhythm. A couple kisses under a torch that's slowly sputtering out. Even the town cats are lounging nearby, their ears flicking to the beat. You hum along to a lullaby-style drinking song, one that talks about old friends and quiet mornings and trying to find your hat again. You know this one. Everyone does. The words come easily, even with the taste of vinegar ale still clinging to your tongue. It's soft and strange and sweet, and for a moment, the whole village seems to sigh in harmony. The song ends. Silence stretches for a heartbeat. Then a single voice, tiny high-pitched, pipes up from the edge of the crowd. Sing the goat song. Groans, laughter. Someone boos, someone cheers. You rise, your turn. You clear your throat, raise your mug, and with all the dignity of a man who once tried to toast a broom, you begin. There once was a goat with a monocle bright, who drank all the mead and got into a fight. The crowd picks up the tune. Feet stomp. Mugs clash. Someone bangs on a bucket with a bone. The square is alive again, pulsing with rhythm and nonsense and wine-drenched joy. You're not sure how long it lasts. Time goes funny when every verse is a victory and every chorus a confession, but eventually voices fade, mugs empty. Songs turn into hums, then into yawns. You lie back on the wall, the stars spinning lazily overhead. You've sung yourself hoarse, you've laughed so hard you nearly pulled something, and as your eyes start to close you hear the last few lines drifting in the air. To the friends that we made, to the bread that we burned, to the mugs that we broke, and the lessons unlearned. Tomorrow your head will hurt. Your tongue will feel like it's made of burlap. But tonight, you are part of the song. The world greets you with light, far too much of it, and the unmistakable sensation of dried mead stuck to your cheek. You sit up, head pounding in stereo, and realise you've spent the night half slumped against a stone wall with a turnip in your lap and one shoe missing. Again. A slow scan of your surroundings reveals the village square in post-festival ruin. Overturned mugs, crusts of bread hardened into masonry, someone's breeches hanging from the church bell rope, and the lingering smell of ale and victory. But before you can even stretch, a soft chant rises in the distance. A slow, rhythmic call and response that somehow carries more weight than last night's musical mayhem. You squint toward the sound and spot a slow-moving line of hooded figures winding through the village gates. Ah, the monks. You forgot about the monks, and more importantly, you forgot that after all that cider-fueled chaos, you'd promised to help them bless the barrels this morning. A ceremony that might have been a real tradition, or just something you drunkenly evented with a solemn voice and a leek for a staff. Either way, they seem to have taken it seriously. You stand up, brush off crumbs and what may be goat hair, and begin limping toward the chant. At the front of the procession is a monk with a bald patch the size of a tankard lid, and a grin that could ferment grapes. "Brother Elbow," he calls when he sees you. You return. You wince. That name again. The monks welcome you back with alarming enthusiasm. They're dressed in simple robes, most of them patched, some of them held together with what looks like embroidery floss and hope. A few carry tankards engraved with crosses, others lug sloshing jugs marked with ink symbols you're not fully convinced are religious. One offers you a sip from a small wooden cup, and you hesitate. But only for a second. Sweet, spicy and hot. Not wine, not ale, something richer, honey and herbs and fire. You exhale and feel like your lungs have just been blessed. Monastic mead, the monk explains, thumping you on the back. The Lord's second favourite miracle. Here's your historical fact. Monasteries were among the most advanced breweries in medieval Europe. Monks had the tools, the literacy and the discipline to perfect brewing techniques. They created precise recipes, experimented with ingredients, and kept meticulous notes, not just for profit, but because they believed that good drink brought people together in God's name. Holy hospitality, they called it. And oh, they drank, especially during fasts. The rule was no solid food, but drink. Perfectly acceptable. So they brewed liquid bread, dark, heavy ales packed with nutrients. The monks didn't just find the loophole, they practically paved a medieval highway through it. You follow the procession toward the cloister garden, where a row of barrels lines the wall like sleepy guards. The monks surround them, each placing a hand on the wood. One begins to sing, not a hymn, but a drinking chant in Latin. You recognise some of the melody from last night. Apparently the lines between sacred and sloshed are blurrier than you thought. They invite you to take part. One monk gives you a palmful of rosemary, another presses a wooden ladle into your hand. You're directed to sprinkle the herb over the barrels and say something spiritually relevant. You clear your throat, raise the ladle, and with all the solemnity you can muster say, "May these barrels never leak and may our headaches be mild." The monks cheer. Here's your quirky fact. Some monasteries had specific centermenters associated with their breweries. St. Arnulf of Metz, for example, was considered the patron saint of brewers because he once told people to drink beer, not water, during a plague. Miraculously, those who obeyed reportedly lived. It wasn't divine intervention, it was that boiling during brewing killed off disease. But hey, you work with what you've got. After the blessing, the monks bring out bread, cheese, and, of course, more drink. A low wooden table appears in the garden, surrounded by wobbly benches and sleepy chickens. You sit between two monks, one who smells like lavender, and another who confesses he hasn't seen his own feet since Easter. The cheese is crumbly, the bread is dense, and the mead is dangerously smooth. Conversation is lazy, looping, and entirely free of judgment. One of them, Brother Tancred, possibly the same monk you challenged to a wrestling match last night, leans in and says, "You talked much yesterday, about truth, about laughter." He pauses, "About cheese also, but mostly laughter." You don't remember it, but you nod because... That sounds like you. He continues, "You said people forget that joy is sacred, that a good joke is as holy as a good prayer." He smiles. "I think you are right." And here comes the scholarly debate, soft as the morning breeze through the rosemary. Were monks truly devoted to temperance, or did they indulge more than they admit? Some historians argue their drinking was medicinal and controlled. Others point to records of drunkenness feasts and infractions involving overindulgence in the Lord's spirits. In some abbeys, you could be punished for drinking too little, on suspicion of heresy or illness. Whatever the case, the monks you're with clearly believe joy and drink can go hand in hand, at least when shared with others, in moderation, or at least good company. As breakfast winds down, you help stack mugs and carry a leftover loaf to a monk who claims he's on a silent day, though he's been muttering about squirrels all morning. The sun is higher now, pushing the shadows back. The garden buzzes with bees, light, and the slow satisfaction of a morning well savoured. You thank the monks. Brother Tancred gives you a parting blessing that ends with a loud belch. "Peace be with your liver," he says, pressing a tiny wooden token into your palm, engraved with a barrel and a halo. "Come back any time," he adds. "Bring stories and onions." You step outside the cloister walls with a full belly, a spinning head, and a strange sense of calm. You've drunk with peasants, nobles, witches, and now monks, and every single one raised a cup in joy, chaos, or both. But you're not done yet, because someone runs up breathless, waving a scrap of parchment and yelling your name. Well, a version of it. "Elbow lad, there you are." You blink. What now? He pants, hands you the parchment. You've been summoned. Summoned? By the Lady Alewife herself. You look down at the parchment. It smells like ale, is stained with something greasy, and reads only, "We need to talk about women and drink. Come immediately. Bring sense if you have any left." You sigh. Of course, and off you go. To the taverns run by the women who might just outdrink, outsmart, and outshout everyone else in this strange medieval kingdom of cups. You find the Lady Alewife's tavern tucked at the edge of the marketplace, wedged between the cooper's shed and a thatcher's storage hut, its wooden sign swinging slightly in the breeze. It bears a faded image of a woman holding a mug aloft, hair blowing dramatically, and eyes narrowed like she's about to call out someone's nonsense, and win. You step through the door cautiously, as if entering a courtroom where the judge is armed and possibly already drunk. The tavern inside is quiet for now. A few early patrons nurse their drinks at wide oak tables, heads down, shoulders hunched, in that universally human posture of, "Please don't speak to me until I've had something fermented." But behind the counter stands the woman herself, sleeves rolled up, apron streaked with flour and hops, and a stare so sharp it could shave the hair off a monk's tonsure. "You're late," she says without looking up from the mug she's polishing. You offer your best, most sheepish smile. "I got distracted by monks." She snorts. "They'll bless anything that doesn't move too fast." She slides the mug down the counter with a practiced flick. It lands perfectly in front of you. "Drink. You're going to need it." You take a cautious sip. It's ale, yes, but different. Thicker. Earthier. With a strange citrus bite and a honeyed aftertaste that lingers on your tongue like a half-forgotten memory. She watches your face with a smirk. "Lemon peel," she says, and a splash of elderflower. Family recipe. And right there, you realise something you'd been skimming over in your previous drunken gallivanting. Women weren't just in the taverns, they ran them. brewed in them, fought, managed to fight, and occasionally rewrote social norms in them. The Lady Alewife wasn't a mascot, she was the whole system. Here's your historical fact. For much of the medieval period, women dominated the brewing industry. Alewives, as they were known, brewed small-scale batches at home, sold their goods directly from their kitchens or street stalls, and ran many of the taverns in town. It was one of the few trades that gave women economic independence. In some towns, nearly every household had a woman who brewed, either for family consumption or profit, and those who were good at it, they built empires, mug by mug. Lady Alewife leans on the counter and studies you. "Last night you told me something strange," she says. "Said you thought men invented drinking." You blink. What? You said it, loudly, over and over. You said, "Drunkenness is a knight's privilege and a monk's curse." Then you hiccuped and kissed my broomstick. Ah, that sounds about right. She pours herself a drink and sits across from you, her eyes still sharp but amused. Men always get the songs and the stories, but while they're toasting each other, someone's got to clean up, pour the next round, and break up the fights. Guess who that usually is? You nod slowly. She continues, "We brewed it, we served it, we kept the peace, we kept the doors open, and when things got rough, we could throw someone through a shutter like it was nothing. Don't let the apron fool you." She's not kidding, one of her biceps could crack walnuts. Here's a quirky fact. The stereotypical image of a witch, pointy hat, broomstick, cauldron, might have actually originated with medieval alewives. The hat made them visible in marketplaces. The broom was propped outside the door to signal fresh ale. The cauldron used to brew the stuff. Add a few moral panics, religious reformers, and social shifts, and boom, independent women suddenly become sinister figures in folklore. Some even believe the witch hunts targeted former alewives whose businesses threatened the emerging male-dominated guild system. You look around the tavern again with new eyes. It's cleaner than most, the tables sanded smooth, the floor swept, the ale poured with precision. But there's no shortage of grit. On the wall hangs a large wooden paddle blackened with use. You suspect it's been used equally for stirring vats and swatting drunkards. A customer stumbles toward the counter, eyes unfocused. He slurs something about needing the usual. Lady Alewife nods, pours him a tankard of water and slides it toward him. "Your wife came by," she says. "Said if I serve you another pint, she's turning me into a toad." The man groans and trudges back to his seat. She smiles faintly. He'll thank me later. Or he won't. Doesn't matter. And here's your scholarly debate. Did the suppression of women in brewing reflect genuine health concerns, or was it pure patriarchy dressed up as public morality? Some researchers argue that quality control led to regulations that excluded women from the industry. But more and more, historians point to a coordinated effort by male guilds and church officials to push women out of profitable trades under the guise of professionalizing them. As brewing scaled up, so did male dominance. The alewife, once common, became rare, then suspicious, then persecuted. You watch as a young girl, probably an apprentice, enters with a bucket of spent grain, dumps it behind the tavern for the pigs, and returns without a word. Lady Alewife nods at her like a general inspecting her troops. You sip the last of your elderflower ale and glance at the woman across from you. "So," you say, "what was I supposed to do now that I'm soberish?" She raises one brow. "Didn't say you were sober. But yes, you promised to learn. Said you'd write a song about alewives. Said it'd make people cry." You blink. "I'm not sure I'm emotionally prepared for that." She grins. "Then start small. Help me haul the barley sacks." You do, and it is not romantic. It's sweaty, dusty, itchy work. You carry sack after sack from the back room, breathing in the smell of grain and damp cloth. You sweep the hearth. You scrub out a mug someone used as a chamber pot. You listen while she explains yeast like it's a living god. By the time you finish, your back aches and your hands smell like sour mash. But you also feel grounded. You've sung the songs, you've danced the dances, but now finally you've seen the spine of it all. The quiet, methodical backbone of medieval intoxication. Labour. Craft. Women working when the songs stop. You thank her. She tosses you a warm roll and a knowing smile. "Tell your monk friends," she says, "if they want real mead, they know where to find me." You nod, step out into the light and take a bite of the roll. It's perfect. Crisp outside, soft inside, slight taste of hops. You're heading toward the main street now, thinking you might take a break, find a place to nap under a tree, let the afternoon pass quietly. But then a group of kids runs by laughing, holding mugs half filled with foamy ale. Wait, ale? For children? You jog after them, baffled. Because apparently everyone in this town drinks. You chase after the group of children, not out of moral panic, but mostly confusion, because you're pretty sure the smallest of them just offered a toast to St. Barley, and then belched with shocking sophistication. They dash through the marketplace in a cloud of dust and giggles, wooden mugs sloshing, the foam dribbling down their chins like milk. One kid, barely older than a well-baked pie, yells, "Last one to finish has to kiss the dung cart," and they all screech in unison. You finally catch up to them near the miller's porch, panting slightly and bracing yourself for the weirdness. One of the older girls glances at you with calm confidence and hands you a half-empty mug. "It's small beer," she says, like that explains everything. "We're not heathens." You squint into the mug. It's pale, slightly cloudy, smells faintly of grain, and is that cabbage? You take the tiniest sip. It's watery, flat, and barely alcoholic, but undeniably beer. It tastes like someone whispered the idea of ale into a mug of porridge water, and that's when it hits you. This isn't some one-off incident of questionable parenting. This is normal. These kids drink small beer the same way modern kids might drink apple juice, except it's safer. Because in the medieval world, water is basically poison roulette. Stagnant wells, livestock runoff, chamber pots dumped too close to streams. It's a hydrating horror show out here. Small beer, on the other hand, gets boiled during brewing, making it the safest drink around. Barely fermented, light in alcohol and cheap to make, it's the breakfast of champions, toddlers, monks, and everyone in between. Here's your historical fact. Small beer, also known as table beer, was a staple of medieval diets. Families brewed it in bulk, often as a byproduct of stronger ales. The first run of grain would yield the good stuff. The second or third run, the small beer, was the weaker, safer alternative that got served to kids, servants, and anyone who couldn't handle or afford stronger brews. It had just enough alcohol to kill off bacteria, but not enough to make a child start composing ballads about imaginary goats. Usually. One of the boys, maybe 6 or 7, proudly announces, "My dad says small beer puts hair on your chest." His friend snorts. "Your dad doesn't even have chest hair." The boy pauses, then drinks anyway, defiant. You sit on the steps beside them, bemused, sipping your own mug slowly. The conversation shifts to more important matters. Who can fart loudest? Which pig in the village is secretly a wizard? Whether mushrooms can talk. Their mugs sit comfortably in their hands the whole time, just another part of their daily lives. And here's your quirky fact. In some regions, even schoolmasters allowed beer in class. There are records of children bringing jugs to lessons, and in a few cases, teachers docking behaviour points not for drinking, but for drinking too noisily or spilling on their slates. If you spilled your ink, shame on you. If you spilled your beer, double shame. You ask one of the kids, "Do you actually like it?" The smallest shrugs. "It's fine, tastes better with honey." Or if you chew on mint leaves after. This is said with the exact authority of a wine critic. You blink. "Do your parents know you're drinking this?" He looks genuinely confused. They made it. And here comes the scholarly debate. Did medieval people drink beer because they enjoyed it, or because they had no other choice? Some historians argue that beer consumption, especially by children, was purely utilitarian. It was hydration, calories, and sanitation wrapped into one ugly ceramic jug. Others believe the line between necessity and pleasure blurred long ago. When you've never had clean water, small beer becomes more than just drink. It becomes culture. Tradition, comfort, it's breakfast and bonding and bedtime. One girl refills her mug from a jug slung over her shoulder and offers you another sip. "This one has berries in it," she says proudly. "You oblige, it's different, slightly sour, vaguely medicinal, and fizzy enough to tickle your nose. My aunt makes it with elderberries," she adds, "for colds, also when she's sad." You pause, processing that. There's a quiet wisdom in it. These children aren't guzzling pints at the tavern. They're growing up with drink woven into their daily lives, not as rebellion, not as escape, but as routine. It's just what's always been done. A rooster struts past, indifferent to your existential moment. One of the boys hops up and shouts, "Race you to the dung cart!" And suddenly they are all off again, clattering down the alley with squeals of laughter and half-full mugs sloshing like tiny battle standards. You rise slowly, joints complaining. Behind you, an old woman leans out of a window and calls down, "Those little monsters took my juck again. If you see them, tell them I will tell the bishop." You nod solemnly and keep walking. The village seems quieter now, not in volume, but in rhythm. You're starting to see it differently, not just as a place to get drunk in spectacular fashion, but as a community that's built drinking into every layer of its life. From noble halls to alehouses to witchy brews and monastery mead. Yes, but also here, in the small, weird, ordinary moments of childhood. You pass a stable where a boy no older than 10 pours grain into a trough with one hand and drinks from a mug with the other. He hums an off-key tavern tune, probably one you sang very badly last night. You wave. He waves back, completely unfazed. You stop at a trough to splash water on your face. It's warm. Probably from the sun, possibly from horses. You regret the decision instantly. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rings noon. It feels both too early and somehow years too late. The mug is still in your hand. You finish the last sip of small beer. It's not good, but it's not supposed to be. It's a placeholder, a survival tool, a bridge between meals and moments. And that's when a bell rings again, closer this time. Not a church bell, a handbell, a U-turn. A man in a blue tunic stands at the edge of the square, ringing furiously and shouting, "Drinking games, coin toss, jug jousting, all challengers welcome!" Of course, you sigh, toss the empty mug into a bucket, and follow, because the small beer is done, and now it's time to get competitive. The man with the bell is already halfway up a barrel when you catch up to him, his blue tunic flapping like a battle flag, his voice projecting across the square with the trained intensity of someone who's been ignored one too many times and will not let that happen again. "Come one, come all, test your mettle, prove your worth, make terrible decisions and look good doing it," he crows. A small crowd gathers, drawn like flies to the sweet sticky promise of glory, gambling and lighthead trauma. You slip in among them, your shirt still damp from that regretful splash at the horse trough, and already you can sense the shift in energy. This isn't the happy-go-lucky chaos of last night's games. This has structure, strategy, slightly too much shouting. A woman to your right claps you on the back. "Back again, eh?" she says, eyes twinkling. "Thought you'd learned your lesson after last night's jug jousting fiasco." You blink. "Jug jousting?" She nods solemnly. "You challenged a farmer to a duel while riding empty ale barrels like horses. You fell off yours and declared the ground the winner." She pauses, thoughtful. "Honestly, best speech I've ever heard." You sigh, shoulders already resigning themselves to their fate. The blue-tunic master of ceremonies, his name, you recall vaguely, is Reeve Padrick, pulls out a list longer than most religious texts. Today's events include one-handed ale lifting, the dizzy pint dash, ye old guess the grog, and of course the final showdown, jug jousting. 2 jugs, 1 victor. Glory eternal, or at least until supper. You try to sneak away. Too late, someone sees you. "It's him, the elbow lad!" someone shouts. The crowd parts like drunks before a barmaid's wrath. Suddenly, you are handed a mug and pushed toward the contestants' table, which is really just a plank of wood balanced on 2 stumps and already covered in mug rings and a faint sense of doom. You take your place. Your opponent is a wiry man with suspiciously well-oiled hair and a tunic far too clean for someone living in this century. He raises one eyebrow. "Back for revenge, are we?" You don't know what you're avenging, but you nod with enough confidence to earn a few cheers. The first game is one-handed ale lifting. The rules are simple. Hold your mug of ale at arm's length, perfectly horizontal, for as long as you can without spilling, shaking or crying. You lift. So does your opponent. The crowd counts aloud. 10 seconds, 20. At 30 seconds your arm begins trembling. Your opponent smirks. Then a fly lands on his nose. His flinch is tiny but fatal. A single splash leaps from his mug and hits the table. The crowd erupts. You lower your mug victoriously, hand now completely numb, and someone crowns you with a dried hop wreath. You are 1 for 1. Here's your historical fact. Drinking competitions were real fixtures of medieval life. Some were informal contests among friends. Others were formalised rituals, especially among guilds and brotherhoods. Pledge drinking was a common form. One person would drink a set amount and then challenge another to match it. Failure to do so could cost you coin, pride, or a small slap to the face with a pickled eel. People took it seriously. There were rules, officials, penalties, sometimes even recorded scores. Next up, the Dizzy Pint Dash. This one is as dumb as it sounds. Spin around a mug 10 times, then race down the square to the market cart and back without spilling a drop. You're handed a fresh mug. It smells faintly of onions. You spin. The world turns into a smear of colour and bad choices. You run, or try to. It's more of a stagger hop flail. Halfway there, you crash into a cabbage crate. A child laughs. You somehow recover and make it back with only 1 foot wet and half your drink intact. Your opponent? He runs like he's been training his whole life for this. But on the return trip, he trips over a pig. A real, actual pig. The crowd gasps. His drink sails through the air and lands squarely in someone's shoe. Disqualified. You've won again. Here's your quirky fact. In some parts of medieval Europe, animals were actively involved in drinking events. Monasteries held festivals where donkeys were blessed with beer. Taverns had cats that judged games by pouring at the winner's mug. And at least one town had a goose that was made honorary alewarden, tasked with honking at those who spilled too much. Reeve Padrick now paces in front of you, voice ringing. We have reached the final showdown, he shouts. Jug jousting. 2 jugs, 2 contestants, a narrow bench. The goal? Knock your opponent off using only the jugs. No hands, no mercy. You're handed 2 ceramic jugs, heavy, sloshing, probably older than you. You and your opponent climb opposite ends of the bench. The crowd hushes. Somewhere a drum starts beating. 3, 2, 1, you charge. Kind of. It's more like a shuffle waddle with menace. You raise your jug. He ducks, he lunges, you counter. There's a clumsy spin, someone throws a cabbage for effect. Then, crack. His jug catches your side, you wobble. But then you plant your foot, yell something about alewife justice, and swing with both arms. He topples backward, lands in a barrel of stale pickles and does not rise. The crowd goes feral. Here's your scholarly debate. Did drinking games actually serve a deeper cultural purpose, group bonding, hierarchy negotiation, or ritualized aggression? Some researchers argue these events were a way to avoid actual conflict by channeling tension into play. Others think they simply gave bored peasants something to do besides mutter about the weather. Either way, your bruised ribs suggest these games were taken very seriously. Reeve Padrick hoists your hand into the air. Behold, the jug jousting champion, lord of libation, defender of the elbow. Someone places a tankard-shaped medallion around your neck. Someone else tries to name a song after you. You bask in it for a moment, wobbling slightly on your victory bench. Then Lady Alewife walks past, carrying a basket of leeks, glances at you and mutters, "Try not to fall in love with yourself, lad. It won't end well." The crowd laughs. You bow, and stagger off the bench. Somewhere in the distance, bells chime again. These ones less festive, more official. You feel a tap on your shoulder. A man in robes frowns at you. "It's time," he says. "You're expected at the cathedral." You groan. "Am I being excommunicated?" He sighs. "You volunteered to debate a priest." Of course you did. Because drunken games aren't enough. Now you've got to argue theology in a pub. You don't remember volunteering to debate a priest, and yet here you are, being half led, half dragged toward the cathedral by a man in robes who keeps muttering things like, "God preserve us," and "The fool from the tavern better show up this time." The cobbled streets shimmer in the sun. Or maybe that's just your hangover turning reflections into hallucinations. Every step feels like a negotiation between your stomach and your feet. They're barely on speaking terms at this point. You reach the cathedral steps, squinting up at the towering stone archways. They're as majestic as they are judgmental. Gargoyles leer from above, faces frozen in permanent disapproval, like celestial bouncers deciding if you're dressed well enough to enter the kingdom of heaven. A crowd is already gathering in the courtyard, townfolk, clergy, farmers, alewives with their aprons still dusted in grain, and a few tavern regulars waving mugs. You see at least 2 people with coins in hand, probably betting against you. Inside, the nave has been rearranged for the discussion, which is really just a polite term for sober people watching drunk people try to remember Latin. A long table sits near the altar, set with mugs of water, scrolls, and a single loaf of bread. You are seated across from a priest, an older man with sharp eyes and a smile like someone who's read every book in the monastery and still knows how to throw a punch. "You're late," he says dryly. You attempt to bow. It ends in a stagger. "Forgive me, Father, for I have had a lot." A few polite titters ripple through the crowd. The priest chuckles. "Let's begin then. Topic. Does drink uplift the soul or endanger it?" You pause. "Did I choose that?" "No," he replies. "You shouted it last night from the cathedral steps while waving a chicken and quoting Aristotle. Ah, still?" You nod solemnly, clear your throat, and somehow manage to channel your inner scholar, a persona you apparently developed last night while using a spoon as a pointer and demanding that beer be canonized. "Drink," you begin, voice echoing slightly through the vaulted ceiling, "is both a comfort and a curse, a balm and a blade, a way to see God and a way to forget your own name." The crowd leans in. A few monks exchange glances. The priest narrows his eyes. "Here's your historical fact." The medieval church's relationship with alcohol was complicated. On one hand, wine was central to the Eucharist, symbolic of Christ's blood. Monasteries brewed and distilled some of the highest quality beverages of the time. On the other hand, excessive drinking was frequently condemned in sermons, and drunkenness was listed among the 7 deadly sins under gluttony. The line between holy and heretical was a fine one, sometimes determined by the amount of ale on your breath during morning prayer. The priest counters. "Drink is distraction, Tubs," he says. "It leads men to idleness, violence, and vanity. Did you not declare yourself a moon king of all goats last night?" You raise a finger. "In my defence, the goats voted unanimously." More laughter. "A win," and he presses on. "What of the tavern brawls? The crimes committed in drink, the loss of self?" You nod. "All true, but also think of the community built around the mug, the songs, the laughter, the shared grief soothed by a single jug passed hand to hand. And here's your quirky fact: in medieval times, alehouses often served as informal town halls. People shared news, resolved disputes, arranged marriages, and even performed mock trials within their boozy walls. If you wanted to know who had stolen a pig, gotten secretly married, or insulted the blacksmith's mother, you asked at the alehouse, over a pint. You continue, warming to the topic despite your dry throat and the priest's very effective beard. "Even scripture," you say, Adgarsensa, "tells us Christ turned water into wine, not the other way around." The priest's eyebrow arches, and St. Paul warned, "Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery." Here, terbindo. You gesture grandly. But he also said, "Use a little wine for the sake of your stomach." We are not told to abstain entirely, but to be wise, to be just, and maybe to toast in moderation. The crowd murmurs, someone claps, a pig in the back grunts, though that may be unrelated. The priest smiles, not smugly, respectfully. "Very well, let's test your wisdom further." He holds up a sealed jug. "This is Pilgrim's Draught, a particularly strong monastery recipe, usually reserved for long journeys and longer confessions. We will drink and then continue the debate." You hesitate. "Is it safe?" He uncorks it. The aroma hits you like a wall. Plums, pepper, what may be sandalwood, and the unmistakable promise of memory loss. You take a sip. It burns, the kind of burn that makes your ancestors wince. And here's your scholarly debate. Were medieval sermons against drink rooted in genuine concern or a desire to control public behaviour? Some argue that moral condemnations were aimed more at disorder than intoxication itself. Others claim it was about maintaining clerical authority. If the tavern became more beloved than the pulpit, what did that say about the power of the church? You cough gently and press forward. "Father," you say, voice raspier now, "do we not sit here sharing drink and discourse in the same cathedral that condemned it yesterday?" He chuckles. "Yes, but the difference is this. We now see each other. You do not slur and I do not scold. We meet as men in the middle." You lean back, stunned. Somehow this became less of a contest and more of a communion. The priest refills both mugs and raises his. "To restraint," he says. You clink mugs. "To respect." And the crowd erupts in applause. As the debate concludes, you exit the cathedral to find the sun high, your thoughts clearer than they've been in days, and a sense of having actually accomplished something meaningful. Then you hear it, a familiar drumbeat, the rhythm of distant dancing, laughter, music, and a voice, yours, definitely yours, echoing from somewhere down the street. Let the feast begin! You groan. What did I schedule this time? A nearby monk grins. The Midsummer Festival. You started planning it in the tavern 2 nights ago, said it would be a celebration of joy and poor judgment. You sigh deeply, but your feet are already moving. Because the feast is calling, and apparently it has fire carts. The drums guide you, steady and impossible to ignore, like a heartbeat shared by an entire town that's collectively decided it's time to do something profoundly unwise. You follow the noise down twisting lanes and across the common, toward the green where the Midsummer Festival is now in full drunken bloom. The air is thick with wood smoke, crushed grass, spilled mead, and the giddy electricity of a town that's decided, for today at least, rules are suggestions and dignity is optional. The green is chaos. Glorious festival-grade chaos. Children run barefoot with painted faces. Dogs bark at fire jugglers. Someone is selling roasted onions on sticks. And in the centre of it all, a cart has indeed been set on fire. It rolls slowly in a wide circle, flames licking the edges of its wheels as townsfolk cheer and someone shouts, "Faster!" with the reckless confidence of a man who's already drunk 3 tankards of cider before lunch. You remember planning this now, sort of. You'd been in the tavern, knee-deep in your 3rd round of who can name more saints while holding a ferret, when someone mentioned Midsummer. You declared loudly that the town needed a proper celebration, with rituals and fire and a goat-based oath. That last part had something to do with symbolism. Maybe. You're hoping you didn't actually marry the goat. A group of villagers spots you and roars your name, or at least a mangled version of it that sounds like Sir Mugwort of Muddlehelm. Close enough. Someone hands you a flower crown that smells vaguely of pickled herbs, and you accept it with the poise of a drunken duke. The jester king from the procession is back, this time dressed in nothing but his curtain robes and a string of garlic. He high-fives you and yells, "It's time for the vows." The vows? He nods, deadly serious. The ritual of the circle. You wrote it yourself, remember? You don't. But again, you're here now. A rough circle forms on the grass, villagers linking arms, grinning, swaying slightly. In the centre, a small wooden platform has been built, decorated with flowers, ribbons, and inexplicably cabbages. A goat stands on it, chewing its cud with bored indifference. You're handed a scroll. It's sticky. You clear your throat. Friends, fools, fire dancers, and fermenters of fine beverages, welcome to the sacred circle of midsummer madness. The crowd cheers, the goat yawns. You continue reading from the scroll you clearly wrote under the influence of equal parts mead and delusion. We gather in the great tradition of ritual nonsense to toast the turning of the sun, to celebrate being alive, and to honour the ancient pact between man and beverage. Someone shouts, "Hear, hear!" You read on. Let us now make our vows, silly, sacred or otherwise. One by one, townsfolk step forward. A shepherd pledges to stop yelling at his sheep in Latin. A baker vows to invent a bread that won't go stale within 5 minutes. A child promises to never again feed mead to the ducks. You make a vow too, though you improvise it on the spot. I vow to remember at least half of this festival. They accept it, with applause. Here's your historical fact. Medieval midsummer festivals were real events, often tied to the summer solstice and the Feast of St. John. They included bonfires, feasting, music, and sometimes rituals to protect against evil spirits or ensure a good harvest. In many places, people leapt over flames, tossed flowers into rivers, or danced in circles until dawn. Drinking was not just encouraged, it was practically divine ordinance. The goat is crowned with a flower wreath. Someone gives it a mug. You decide not to ask whether it's full. The ritual ends with a massive toast, the entire crowd raising mugs and shouting, "To the long day and the short memory." You chug your drink. It's lukewarm and suspiciously herbal. Probably something left over from the monastery's experimental mead batch. Your vision sparkles a little. Your arms tingle. A juggler walks past juggling flaming apples. You decide that's probably fine. And here's your quirky fact. In some regions, midsummer rituals involved binding things. Wreaths tossed on roofs for luck. Lovers tying wrists together to test their bond. Even animals symbolically married to people for blessings. You're starting to worry the goat marriage might not have been symbolic. You quietly check your finger for any rings. As the afternoon melts into golden haze, games begin. Not your usual drinking contests, these are more interpretive. There's mud wrestling, a competitive belching arena, a pie-eating contest where the pies may or may not contain actual pie. There's a man balancing 6 mugs on his head while reciting saint names backward. You cheer, you join, you lose, you don't care. Then come the dances. Not elegant courtly waltzes, but stomping chaotic lines of people skipping, spinning and colliding, like tipsy atoms in a field of grass and spilled cider. You join in, arms flung wide, sweat pouring, grin stretching. Somewhere in the rhythm you feel a kind of freedom, messy, absurd, real. And here's your scholarly debate. Were these festivals acts of joyful resistance or mechanisms of social control? Some historians argue that local lords and clergy tolerated or even encouraged such chaos to vent public energy, keeping the lower classes distracted. Others believe these gatherings were the people's space, an ungoverned reprieve where norms bent and laughter ruled. Looking around at the flower-crowned goat, the jester king leading a conga line, and the local judge asleep in a cabbage cart, you're inclined to believe the latter. As twilight creeps in, the fire cart rolls one last loop before someone douses it with beer. The flames hiss, smoke rises. A group sits in a circle, passing a single jug of something dark and potent, each taking a sip and telling a tale. You join them, offering your best, a half-true story about the monk who taught you to sing psalms backward. The group laughs, clinks mugs, and leans against each other as night falls. The stars come out. The music softens. The goat snores gently by the embers. You lie back on the grass, arms folded under your head, and breathe. Everything aches, but in a satisfying, well-lived kind of way. You survived another day of drink, ritual, dancing, and possible barnyard matrimony. Tomorrow will be quieter. Probably. But tonight, you're wrapped in the warmth of mead, memory, and the glowing embers of madness well spent. You wake up beneath a table, which is either poetic or deeply concerning, depending on your attitude towards splinters and misplaced dignity. The table in question is located inside the tavern again, somehow, and your last memory was lying on the grass, staring at stars and wondering whether goats could snore. Judging by the stiff straw poking your back, the crust of pie on your sleeve, and the faint scent of onion mead still clinging to your clothes, you must have sleepwalked your way here, or been carried, possibly by the goat. You wouldn't put it past her at this point. Voices murmur above you, sleepy, groggy, and already regretting yesterday's choices. You crawl out like some hungover goblin emerging from a cupboard and squint toward the light. The tavern's back in business, albeit in recovery mode. No music, just the clinking of mugs, the occasional belch, and the soft scraping of someone trying to chisel dried gravy off a table with a butter knife. Then someone says it. It's misrule day. You pause. Wait, what day? The grizzled man at the bar looks over. Fool's Day. Day of misrule, you don't know? You shake your head, instantly regretting it as your brain sloshes like a half-full bucket. He chuckles. Course not. You're the Lord of Misrule this year. Your blood goes cold. I'm what? He slaps a faded paper onto the table. It's a crude drawing of your face, or possibly a turnip, wearing a crown and surrounded by pigs. Beneath it, in loopy ink, all hail the elbow prophet, chosen fool, and sovereign of silliness. Apparently, during yesterday's festival frenzy, someone, almost certainly you, decided that today, in grand medieval tradition, would be a full day of absolute sanctioned nonsense. And because the village was drunk and bored and aggressively enthusiastic about any excuse for pageantry, they made it official. Here's your historical fact. The Feast of Fools, or the Day of Misrule, was a real medieval phenomenon. Typically held around Christmas or during certain festivals, it turned the social order upside down. A Lord of Misrule was elected, often a commoner, servant, or lowest-ranking cleric, and for a day they ruled in mockery of authority. Priests dressed like jesters, children led processions, and highborn lords were parodied without consequence. Think of it as a medieval purge, but with more pies to the face and less violence. The tavern door swings open. A trumpeter in rags blows a sour note. A choir of villagers in mismatched clothes marches in, tossing flower petals and dried beans. And at the centre of the chaos is your crown, a metal chamber pot polished to a gleam and festooned with cabbage leaves. It's placed firmly on your head. "All hail the Lord of Misrule," someone cries. You groan. "I just woke up." "Perfect," another villager says. "True power begins in discomfort." You're marched out into the square, a jester's robe tossed over your shoulders, boots mismatched, one sock stuffed with straw. The townsfolk have transformed themselves into walking parody. Butchers dressed as bishops, children in judge robes, dogs wearing tiny hats. The baker is pretending to be the town constable and already trying to arrest people for smiling too seriously. Your job as Lord of Misrule? Lead them, direct the silliness. Make decrees, stir chaos, mock the proper, break the rules. Naturally you rise to the occasion. Your first decree, all taxes must be paid in compliments and pickled eggs. Second, every chicken is now a knight unless proven otherwise. Third, anyone caught not drinking must immediately be serenaded by a drunk man with a lute and unresolved emotional issues. You point at a passing goose. You stand trial for public honking. The goose honks and flees. The people cheer. And here's your quirky fact. In some cities, the Lord of Misrule had real authority for the day. Allowed to interrupt court, enter churches mid-sermon, even commandeer food from noble kitchens. It was all done in the name of holy mockery, a parody of power that temporarily levelled the playing field. Of course, some lords hated it. Others leaned in and used it as a stress valve for the peasantry. Let them laugh at us today, they reasoned, so they don't rebel tomorrow. You organise a backwards parade, complete with donkeys walking in reverse and townsfolk chanting, "Hail the moon, boo the sun." Everyone joins. Even the priest, who shows up wearing a wine barrel and declaring himself Cardinal of Carousing. He blesses your mug with a flick of mead and a wink. Halfway through the parade, you climb a cart and deliver an impromptu sermon about the sanctity of laughter and the divine origin of custard. The people applaud, someone cries, a child yells, "Down with bedtime!" and is instantly promoted to High Chancellor of Chaos. The entire village becomes a living joke. Every job is swapped. The innkeeper scrubs chimneys. The blacksmith dances in a tutu. The mayor begs passers-by for poetry. Anyone refusing to participate is hauled before the court of public tickling, presided over by 3 local pigs and a very committed actor wearing a wig made of hay. And here's the scholarly debate. Was misrule a true rebellion, or simply sanctioned silliness? Some believe it was a form of protest disguised as festivity. Commoners mocking the ruling class without fear of reprisal. Others see it as the opposite, a safety valve designed by those in power to diffuse tension, reminding everyone that their status was only on loan, and that real change would never come. One day of mischief followed by 364 days of obedience. You for your part just think it's hilarious. At one point you order a knighted goat to joust a cabbage on a stick. At another, you officiate a wedding between 2 brooms. A woman tells you her turnip stew cured her husband's jealousy. You knight her on the spot. As the sun begins to set, you lead one final procession. Everyone now thoroughly exhausted, faces painted, shoes lost, pies mostly eaten. At the centre of the green, the crowd gathers for the closing ceremony. You stand on a stool and give your last decree. Tomorrow we return to our usual nonsense, but tonight we are kings, jesters, fools, and family. The crowd cheers. Someone lights a torch. The goat bows. You remove the chamber pot crown and hand it to a passing dog. Rule wisely, you whisper. It licks your hand and runs away. You return to the tavern one last time, slumping into a bench, the misrule fading like mist, replaced with aches and the slow return of sense, or at least something resembling it. The barmaid places a mug in front of you. "So," she says, "how's it feel to be the Lord of Nonsense?" You raise your mug, comfortably familiar. The morning after Misrule Day hits like a hammer wrapped in regret. You open one eye, then immediately close it again, assaulted by sunlight that feels like a personal attack. Your mouth is dry, your legs are confused, your back is screaming in protest, presumably from the hours spent dancing, jousting, and possibly sleep-crawling through a turnip patch. You can still taste pickled onion on your tongue. And is that straw in your ears? You groan, roll over, and find yourself face to face with the chamber pot crown. It's sitting on the floor beside the bench you passed out on, cabbage still wilting sadly from the rim. the crown of a ruler dethroned by ale and hubris. You sit up, bones creaking like a poorly oiled trebuchet. The tavern's quiet now, just you, a few sleeping bodies slumped over the tables, and the barmaid sweeping up what might be breadcrumbs or might be ancient ruins. She sees you move and smirks. Welcome back to the land of consequences. You attempt to smile. It comes out as a dry cough. Drink this, she says, sliding a clay mug toward you. Don't ask what's in it. It's either going to save your life or make you vomit so violently that you start over with a new soul. You sip. It's both sour and spicy. Your eyebrows attempt to flee your face. Your stomach immediately begins negotiating with your mouth, unsure whether this is salvation or betrayal. What was that, you wheeze? Hangover cure, she says. Folk recipe, pickled eel juice, mustard seed, and a few other things I'm not legally allowed to name. And here's your historical fact. Medieval hangover cures were wild. People believed that certain foods, herbs, or rituals could help rebalance the body after a night of excess. Common remedies included crushed rosemary and wine, raw garlic, vinegar-soaked bread, and the ever-popular dried eels boiled in ale. Some just relied on prayer, others favoured sweating it out in a bathhouse or applying leeches to remove the humours. You're honestly not sure which sounds worse. You clutch the mug and shuffle toward a table. The barmaid slides over a bowl of something mushy and brown. Porridge, she says, with grated apple and regret. You eat slowly, cautiously. Every bite feels like an act of survival. Across the room, someone is snoring deeply into their own mug. Another man, shirtless and curled around a turnip, mumbles something about owls. You nod sympathetically. Here's your quirky fact. In parts of medieval Europe, people believed that a hangover could be caused by overheating the brain. Some tried to cure this by sleeping with damp cloths on their heads, or by placing chilled cabbage leaves over their foreheads. One particularly creative remedy involved tying a dried toad to your wrist to absorb the spirits. Medicine was just witchcraft with extra steps. You ask the barmaid if you did anything catastrophic last night. She raises an eyebrow. Nothing new, she says, though you did try to kiss the fire cart. You groan. And you challenged the priest to a dance battle. You groan louder. And you swore you were going to open a school of liquid philosophy. Okay, that one's kind of genius. You finish the porridge. Slowly life returns to your limbs. Your head still throbs like a cathedral bell at high noon. But the cure, terrifying though it was, seems to have helped. The tavern begins to stir. A few other revellers sit up, blinking, stretching, moaning, like haunted furniture. The barmaid surveys the room with the grim satisfaction of a veteran battlefield medic. This, she says, is the real price of joy. A man at the corner table raises his hand weakly. Is it too late to give up drinking forever? Yes, the barmaid replies. You already wrote a love song to a keg and proposed marriage in front of half the village. Oh. The silence that follows is broken only by the distant sound of a rooster coughing. Or maybe that's just a rooster. You can't tell anymore. Here comes the scholarly debate. Were hangovers in the medieval period viewed as punishments, medical imbalances, or just occupational hazards? Some texts describe hangovers in spiritual terms, as divine punishment for indulgence. Others list them under common illnesses, treated with the same herbs used for colds or fever. But most evidence suggests people just accepted them. If you drank, you paid. That was the deal. Sobriety wasn't virtue, it was recovery. You decide to venture outside. The fresh air hits you like a slap, but a kind one. The village is in shambles. Booths half collapsed, streamers hanging limply from trees, flower petals ground into the mud. A goose waddles past, dragging a piece of bunting in its beak. A child pokes a soggy pie with a stick. Looks like a battlefield, you mutter. Worse, says the blacksmith, leaning against his door. Looks like the morning after a battlefield. You nod. Across the square, a group of villagers are gathered around a cart of leftover ale barrels. Someone's reading off names and tallying debts. One woman is trying to explain to her husband why there's a piglet in their bed. No one seems particularly alarmed. You sit on the well's edge and reflect. These people drank, sang, danced, and lost their minds with you. They'll do it again. Next feast, next holy day, next excuse, but they also rise, hungover and headachy, and start over. Patch up the square, feed the goats, forgive each other. You see it clearly now, hangovers weren't just a nuisance, they were part of the cycle. Excess followed by return, laughter followed by silence. It wasn't moral or medical, it was rhythm. You pull the chamber pot crown from your bag, still greasy, still absurd. You place it gently on the well, a monument to your temporary reign, a warning to others. Then you hear a call from the road. "The plague cart's late again," someone shouts. Right, because you forgot this is still medieval Europe, and tomorrow might not bring a hangover, it might bring the Black Death. You sit there on the edge of the well for a moment longer, staring into the dregs of your soul and the deeper, darker dregs of your hangover. The word plague echoes through your skull with the kind of dull, reverberating weight that makes your teeth itch. You glance down the road, half expecting to see a cart piled with corpses and dread, bells clinking, wheels squeaking, and a man in a black hooded cloak shouting something cheerful like, "Bring out your dead." And yet, nothing. Just an empty road, sunlight bouncing innocently off muddy ruts, as if this world isn't held together with straw prayer and the occasional public execution. You breathe, then you smell something. It's not bad exactly, it's just strong, like dried rosemary, smoked meat and despair. Then you hear wheels, a creak, a cough. And yes, finally the plague cart rolls into view, slower than expected, led by a donkey that looks like it's 2 disappointments away from laying down and quitting the timeline entirely. The man behind the reins is thin, wrapped in layers of fabric, face covered except for the eyes. Those eyes are surprisingly lively. "Good morning," he says, waving. "Lovely day for pestilence, isn't it?" You blink. "I thought the plague was, done." He shrugs. Comes and goes, like spring or regret. And here's your historical fact. During the height of the Black Death, entire regions of Europe turned to drink as a form of escapism. Taverns became more crowded, not less. People reasoned that if they were going to die anyway, they might as well go out with a mug in hand. Chroniclers wrote of mass feasts held in the middle of outbreaks, with musicians playing while people drank and danced just feet away from the sick. Public health guidelines were, let's say, loose. Quarantine meant drink somewhere else. The cart stops in the square. A few villagers approach, not panicked, but curious. A couple of the more hungover ones just grumble and roll over in the shade. The cart is half filled with barrels and sacks of what you presume are plague-related supplies, though one suspiciously large bundle is labelled as turnip pudding, do not open. The cartman hops down, removes his face wrap and stretches. "They said not to enter the village," he explains cheerfully, "so naturally I brought wine." "Wine?" you ask, hopeful. "Medicinal," he says, tapping one of the barrels. "For the humours." The villagers nod solemnly. Yes, the humours," someone mutters. "Mine have been terribly misaligned since Candlemas." He cracks open the barrel. The scent hits you like a memory that didn't happen to you. A blend of fermented berries, cloves, vinegar, and what might be desperation. A makeshift line forms immediately, everyone holding mugs, bowls, and one very optimistic ladle. You follow, because of course you do. Because when the plague arrives, there are only 2 things to do, run or drink. And here's your quirky fact. Plague wine was a real thing. People believed certain herbs and strong alcohols could purify the air and the blood. Recipes included wormwood, sage, peppercorns, and entire lemons, rind and all, boiled into a hellish flaming brew meant to smoke out the corruption. Apothecaries swore by it. Physicians avoided it. Drunk uncles claimed it could raise the dead. You get your cup filled, it's thick, cloudy, warm. "Do I drink this or perform an exorcism with it?" you ask. "Both," says the cartman. "It's versatile." You sip. It's not the worst thing you've tasted this week, but it definitely argues with your internal organs on the way down. Your stomach makes a noise that could be translated as, "Who gave this man soap and called it a beverage?" But after a moment the warmth spreads. Not just the drunk kind. Something gentler, quieter. A heat that sits behind your ribs like a brave candle. You look around the square and realise people are laughing. Not wild misrule-style belly laughs, just quiet chuckles, shared glances. The kind of laughter people use when they're scared and want to pretend they aren't. Because here comes the hard truth. This town has seen the plague before. Some have lost family, some have lost whole families. Everyone here knows what it smells like. They've seen the telltale sores, the coughing, the slow collapsing of lungs. And yet they don't flee. They don't scream. They pour a mug. They sit with neighbours. They toast to the things they can still taste. You sit on the edge of a cart, sipping your questionable wine, and hear a priest down the road muttering prayers under his breath, while also asking if there's any of that plague brandy left. The barmaid appears beside you with a wooden spoon and a look that says she's about to force-feed someone if necessary. You ask her, "What did people do last time the plague came?" She shrugs. Some prayed, some fled, some drank, some got married on the spot, said if the world's ending, might as well share a bed. Others just sat quietly and waited. Waited for what? Death, or the next day, whichever came first. There's your scholarly debate. Did alcohol make the plague worse or help people endure it? Some historians argue that crowding into taverns helped spread disease. Others say that without alehouses, people would have lost all will to go on. Alcohol became a coping mechanism, a communal act of resistance, a toast to defiance, a mug held up in the face of invisible death. A girl skips past holding a mug of small beer. A man sits cross-legged with a lute, singing softly about lost love and boiled beans. A dog barks at nothing in particular, then lies down beside a basket of onions. Life, it seems, insists on continuing no matter what death is up to. You look around. This little town that's somehow danced its way through disaster after disaster, stubborn as an ox, tipsy as a friar and twice as loud. They won't stop drinking, not because they're foolish, but because they understand, viscerally, that celebration is resistance, that a joy, shared even with bad wine, is a form of armour. You raise your mug to no one and everyone. To the ones who are still here, you say softly. The barmaid hears you. She clinks her spoon against your cup. To the next morning, she adds. And somewhere behind you someone starts singing. Because plague or no plague, it's still a Tuesday. And in this town, Tuesday means drinking songs and roasted turnips. By mid-afternoon, the so-called plague wine has done its job, which is to say, you're buzzed enough to forget that death is allegedly rolling through town in a squeaky cart, but not so far gone that you're trying to bless livestock again. The village, in its typically unbothered way, has settled into that oddly peaceful rhythm that follows every fresh panic. If it hasn't killed us yet, pour another. You find yourself drifting back toward the tavern, pulled by the gravitational force of food, shade, and a vague hope that someone has discovered a hangover cure that doesn't involve pickled anything. Instead, you walk straight into a cluster of people standing in a loose circle, cups in hand, arguing, loudly, passionately, and completely unnecessarily. "No, you absolute turnip," one man shouts, nearly spilling his ale. "It's clearly the stars that cause bad harvests. Mars was in Retracing when the pigs got sick." Woman slaps her mug on the table. "It's not the stars, it's bad humours. If your bile's out of balance, your grain won't grow right either." "Absolute nonsense," the third man chimes in. "The only truth is in the Book of Beasts. Pigs are born cursed." You lean closer, cautiously. "What's this then, debate club?" The barmaid, who of course is present, arms crossed and expression hovering somewhere between amused and exasperated, jerks her chin towards the table. "Pub debates," she says. "Weekly thing. Been going on since before the last bishop got caught drunk in the duck pond." You raise an eyebrow. "This happens every week?" "Every Thursday," she says. "Which is to say, every time someone finishes their chores and still has the energy to yell." You look around. These aren't scholars. This isn't a university. This is a farmer, a seamstress, a blacksmith with soot still on his face, and a man you're pretty sure has never owned socks. And yet they're deep in the kind of passionate debate normally reserved for cathedrals or kingdoms teetering on the edge of war. Today's topic, pigs, stars, and the morality of fermented cabbage. Someone shoves a mug into your hand. "You're the elbow prophet," the woman with the loudest voice declares. "Settle this. Do pigs die from sin, science, or Saturn?" You blink. Is all of the above allowed? A cheer erupts. "Philosophers, answer!" someone roars. And here's your historical fact. Medieval taverns weren't just places for drinking, they were centres of thought. Peasants didn't have libraries, but they had opinions, and they sharpened them over mugs. Disputes about God, the stars, medicine, and even philosophy weren't limited to universities. They were debated in the dusty corners of alehouses, where someone with no formal education could still quote Aristotle if they'd heard the local priest mention him enough. A woman in an apron argues that beer is a moral beverage, since it comes from the earth and tastes like a good harvest. A young man counters that wine is holier because Jesus chose it. Someone else yells, "Jesus never drank mead and look where that got us." The blacksmith pounds the table. "Suffering is the path to wisdom," he declares. "You just say that because your wife won't let you buy a second chicken," the baker retorts. Everyone laughs. And here's your quirky fact. In some medieval villages, informal gatherings like these were called wit circles. People would share proverbs, argue folklore, and test their memory of church sermons or travelling bard tales. The smartest man in the village wasn't always the priest. It might be the man who could recite 3 saints, quote 2 psalms, and still win at dice while rhyming. Pub knowledge was weird, wild and sticky. You sip your ale and watch the arguments evolve. They start with pigs and end up at politics, with someone claiming that kings shouldn't be allowed more than 3 wives unless they can name all of them in order. A fierce battle breaks out over whether a bee sting to the nose is a divine punishment or just bad luck caused by bad posture. Someone insists that dreams are predictions, someone else says they're just indigestion. You're pretty sure both are right. A man taps you on the shoulder. He's older, with a beard like a thorn bush, and the air of someone who's read every wall carving in town. "You said something smart once," he says. "Only once?" He nods solemnly. "It was last night. You said, 'The truth is just a well-aged lie.'" You blink. "That sounds smarter than me." He grins. "We wrote it down. It's on the wall behind the stew pot." Sure enough, when you wander into the kitchen, there it is, your quote scrawled in chalk on the stone. Below it, someone's added, "Also, never trust a goat with a secret." You rejoin the table, where the debate has shifted again. Now it's about whether dreams that happen after drinking count as prophecy. You offer your input. Depends on what you drank. If it was the witch's brew with a floating beetle, then yes, that's divine. Everyone nods, and here's the scholarly debate. Historians often overlook the intellectual life of common folk. Formal education was rare, but that didn't mean people weren't curious. They debated theology, astronomy, natural philosophy, all with limited tools and no books. Was it accurate? Often not. Was it important? Absolutely. It created community, it gave people voice, and it reminded them that even if they couldn't read, they could still think. The sun dips low as the argument finally fizzles out. No one wins, no one loses, except maybe the pig. People drift back to their chores or nap spots. You stay behind a moment, watching the dust settle. There's something beautiful about a group of half-drunk villagers arguing the nature of the soul with their mouths full of barley and bread. It means they care. It means they're alive. You step outside, mug in hand, and wander back toward the square. A lute plays softly in the distance. The goat bows as you pass. You bow back. You think to yourself, in a world of plagues, bad weather, and terrible shoes, maybe the smartest thing anyone can do is argue about pigs for a little while. You turn the corner, and suddenly everything's gone. Your mug's gone, your shoes are gone, there's a chicken in your arms, you've blacked out. Again, you come to slowly, like a pie being baked at the wrong temperature, first too cold, then suddenly blisteringly hot. Your eyes blink open one at a time. You're lying on a patch of dirt, cheek pressed into something warm and slightly feathery. You shift your head. The chicken stares back at you, entirely unamused. You try to sit up and immediately regret it. Your head is a cathedral bell that someone keeps ringing out of spite. You're outside, that much is obvious. It's night again, and the stars overhead are spinning a little too enthusiastically for your comfort. The square is empty, eerily so. The lanterns have burned low, the fires are nothing but ash, and even the usual tavern chorus of late-night groans and low singing has gone quiet. You sit up fully and take stock. Shirt half-buttoned, inside out. Belt missing, mug gone. Dignity highly suspect. And your shoes? They're nailed to a post 10 feet away with a note that simply reads, "You lost." You blink, slowly, the way someone does when they're trying to remember whether they stole a loaf of bread or just dreamt it. The last thing you can clearly recall is the pub debate about pigs and prophecy. After that, it's all smudged. Colours and voices and something about a sack race involving empty wine jugs. You stand, wobble, really, and the chicken hops out of your arms with an indignant squawk. You try to apologise. The chicken does not accept. You watch it strut off into the dark, presumably to file a formal complaint. Staggering through the square, you begin the classic medieval rite of piecing together your night. You ask a sleeping man under a bench, but he only mumbles something about cabbage taxes. You find the lute player from earlier slumped against a well, his instrument missing a string and possibly an entire chord. You nudge him. Did I do anything strange? He opens one eye. Stranger than challenging the mayor to a duel with turnips? You groan. No, he adds, then promptly falls back asleep. You keep going, looking for something familiar. Instead, you find the baker, half asleep in his delivery cart, who insists you invented a new religion last night based on yeast. He holds up a sticky piece of parchment covered in flour and scribbles. You called it the First United Fermentationist Temple. That might actually be one of your better ideas. You sit down on the tavern steps and try to breathe. The world sways gently, like a boat full of mistakes. The air smells like burnt onions and distant laughter, and somewhere faintly a nightjar calls out. Either that or someone snoring into a horn. Here's your historical fact. Blackout drinking in the medieval period wasn't just a rare accident. It was a known phenomenon. People even had a variety of terms for it. Being overcome by drink. Losing time. Waking in the devil's back pocket. Many chroniclers noted entire feasts where guests didn't remember how they got home, if they made it home at all. Some viewed it as shameful, others just shrugged and called it tradition. You look down and notice your hands are stained purple. Berry juice, maybe? Ink, possibly blood, probably jam. You sniff jam, thank the gods. You feel something hard in your pocket and pull it out. A single playing die, carved from bone and painted red. You turn it in your palm. The six side has been scratched into a strange symbol, a sun with a face. That's definitely not yours. You have no idea where it came from. You put it back in your pocket, just in case. And here's your quirky fact. There are reports of drunken tokens being passed around in medieval drinking circles. Small, often carved items that one would be given after a particularly wild night. Sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a challenge. If you woke with one in your pocket, it meant you were now part of something. Or maybe just that someone wanted you to think so. Your stomach gurgles, a concerning, prolonged sound that makes a nearby cat flinch. You pat your belly like that'll help. You feel oddly hollow, not just from hunger, but from the absence of memory. You stand and start moving again. If you can find the place where it all unravelled, maybe you can stitch a few things back together. You pass the barmaid sweeping the tavern porch. She sees you and nods. Good blackout? You shrug. Can't complain. Might have started a cult, maybe got married, might have eaten a lit candle. Only one of those is true, she says, deadpan. And the candle's fine. She points toward the old stone mill house at the edge of town. You wandered off that way, kept mumbling something about the lost wine of the gods and the ancient barrel of knowledge. Right. Classic. You follow the path she indicated, which winds through a thicket of weeds and old fence posts. The mill house is dark and sagging, abandoned for years, but somehow open. The door swings on its hinges as you approach, creaking like it's waiting for you. You step inside. There is a barrel, huge, old, bound in rusted iron and covered in dust. A few half-burnt candles sit around it, wax dribbled like tears. In front of the barrel, a ladle. Behind it, a mural scratched crudely into the stone wall, of a face, half smiling, half frowning. Your face, nope, absolutely not. You back out slowly, carefully, and decide not to ask more questions tonight. Here's the scholarly debate. Do blackout memories truly vanish, or are they tucked away, recoverable through certain triggers? Some say memories lost to drink are burned away entirely. Others suggest they live in the brain like forgotten dreams, just waiting for the right sound, smell or chicken to bring them back. You walk back to the square, slightly rattled, definitely exhausted. You've drunk with monks and fools, argued with farmers and priests, and somehow created an underground wine cult during a blackout. You're either a visionary or just really bad at pacing yourself. Either way, you've reached a new layer of medieval madness, the one where memory itself becomes a gamble. As you curl up on the tavern porch with a borrowed blanket and a prayer to no one in particular, you whisper to yourself, "Tomorrow I'll be responsible." You snort at your own lie, because tomorrow you're joining a pilgrimage, and rumour says the pilgrims are worse than the villagers. You awaken to the sound of bells, tiny ones, fast and clumsy, like someone tried to teach a goat how to dance and then gave it a tambourine. You groan, sit up, and find yourself swaddled in a wool blanket that smells like turnip stew and second-hand prophecy. The tavern porch is bathed in dawn light, and standing in front of you is an entire caravan of chaos. Pilgrims, dozens of them, maybe more, dressed in the finest assortment of patched cloaks, misbuttoned tunics, and sandals held together with sheer willpower and possibly marmalade. A few wear wide-brimmed hats pinned with religious medallions, others wear none at all, and squint directly at the sun like it owes them money. One man has a walking staff made from what appears to be an old fence post, complete with rusty nails still sticking out. You blink at them, they blink back. Then a woman steps forward, her face deeply lined, her hands leathered from the road, and her smile sharp. "You're coming with us," she says. You squint. "I am?" "You swore," she replies flatly. "Last night. Swore on bread and wine and the bones of St. Rumbold." You open your mouth to object, but several things happen at once. A monk hands you a satchel of dried peas, someone tosses you a wide-brimmed hat, and a boy ties a wooden flask around your waist with ribbon. Just like that, you're conscripted into holy travel. The pilgrimage begins. You trudge beside them, groggy and sore, the world swaying under your feet like a drunken barge. They sing as they walk, off-key, joyful, terribly earnest. The songs are about saints and miracles and occasionally soup. You try to hum along. One line rhymes virtue with turnshoe. You don't ask questions. Here's your historical fact. Pilgrimages were a core part of medieval religious life. People walked hundreds of miles to visit sacred relics, shrines, or sites where miracles supposedly occurred. Some went to atone for sins, others went for healing, and many, truthfully, went for the social element, the chance to escape their routine, meet new people, and yes, get thoroughly and gloriously drunk along the way. Pilgrims were known to pack flasks of ale for the journey and to stop at every inn, tavern, and cider house within shouting distance. After only an hour, you learn a crucial truth. Pilgrims are not saints. One man, Godric he says, but it might be Gerald, starts passing around a flask of something blessed by a bishop and fermented by a miracle. It tastes like raisins, soaked in regret. You take 2 sips and hand it back, trying not to weep openly. The woman beside you nods approvingly. "You'll survive the road," she says. Soon you reach your first stop, a crossroads shrine to a local saint, Saint Balcher, patron of lost socks and regrettable oaths. There's a faded carving of him above the altar, 1 foot raised, face locked in an expression of serene confusion. Pilgrims gather around and kneel. A few light candles, one man offers a boiled egg. You offer a whisper of apology to your liver. The road continues. You walk beside a barrel-chested man named Tybalt, who claims he once saw Saint Belcher himself appear in a bowl of porridge. "He had raisins for eyes," Tybalt says, deadly serious. "Told me to avoid goats. I never trusted them since." You decide not to mention your goat adventures. Not yet. And here's your quirky fact. Some pilgrims travelled with musical instruments and used them to earn extra coin, or simply to pass the miles. Others carried portable shrines, wore costumes, or engaged in holy theatricals along the way, reenacting saintly miracles in ways that ranged from moving to profoundly ridiculous. One documented group staged the feeding of the 5,000 using nothing but crusty rolls and a lot of enthusiasm. Midday heat settles in like a wet blanket. You rest under a crooked tree with the others, sharing bread and a soft cheese that tastes like someone whispered the idea of milk to a mushroom. The conversation drifts between theology, weather, and taverns visited. You learn that one man joined the pilgrimage to escape a woman he accidentally married during a May festival. Another admits he's following a dream he had about a goat in a bishop's hat. It's possible everyone here is a fugitive, a fanatic, or a bard with unfinished lyrics. Then comes the drinking game. Not an official one, just something someone starts out of boredom. It involves passing a flask, naming a saint, and then miming how that saint might walk with blisters. It's hilarious until you get to St. Stephen, and someone does a convincing impression that ends in falling into a ditch. You help them up. They hand you the flask. You drink. Here comes the scholarly debate. Were pilgrimages acts of devotion or disguised holidays? Scholars argue both. For many, the religious purpose was genuine, especially for the sick or deeply devout. But for others, it was one of the only excuses available for travel, adventure, and sanctioned rule-bending. Being on pilgrimage gave you special protections, lighter punishments, and access to ale across borders. and when you returned, you came back not just hungover, but spiritually upgraded. By sunset, the road has taken its toll, blisters bloom, the songs turn to muttering. One man tries to light a fire with flint and produces only swearing. A woman unpacks dried apples and insists everyone eat one to ward off night spirits. You eat yours. It tastes like tree bark soaked in vinegar. You camp under an old elm tree, the moon rising behind its skeletal branches. Someone pulls out a wineskin and passes it round while a wiry young pilgrim begins a story about a demon, disguised as a nun who tricked a bishop into baptizing a duck. You lean back, resting your head against your bundle of extra socks and crushed biscuits. You're not sure if this is faith, foolishness, or just another excuse to walk in circles and drink from flasks with strangers. Probably all three. But when the wine hits your belly, and the stars wheel overhead, and laughter crackles like firewood through the trees, you decide not to care. You raise your cup to the moon, and whisper, "Lead the way, Saint Belcher." The moon does not answer, but your neighbour does, by handing you a second cup, because the road is long, and pilgrims, it turns out, never walk it sober. Morning on the pilgrim road arrives rudely, as mornings always do when you've slept on roots, shared wine with strangers, and used a chicken as a pillow for the second time in 1 week. You wake to the sound of someone already arguing about relics, the clatter of cooking pots, and the distinct scent of dried fish being rehydrated in a way that can only be described as criminal. You peel yourself off the ground, groan dramatically, and roll onto your side just in time to see one of the older pilgrims relieve himself on a cursed stump. No one seems concerned. Around the campsite, people are preparing for the day with a grim sort of efficiency. A woman wraps her feet in rags. A boy sharpens a stick into what he proudly calls a pilgrim spear. An old Tobald, your new favourite mystic liar, fish-scented philosopher, is applying what looks like goose fat to his ankles to confuse the demons. You don't ask questions, you just nod respectfully, and pretend to do something useful with your blanket, which is currently soaked through from dew or possibly tears. Someone hands you breakfast. It's a flat, rubbery cake that might be barley, might be moss, or might just be revenge. You chew it anyway. Hunger makes everything negotiable. The road ahead stretches in an endless coil of dirt and decision-making. Today's destination is a small chapel, said to house the toe bone of St. Euphraxia, a minor saint known for curing indigestion and hexing lazy bishops. According to the rumour that keeps getting bigger with every retelling, the relic once glowed in the presence of heretics, healed a dog and wept sour wine during Lent. You're not convinced, but the promise of a roof and possibly edible food is enough to get your feet moving. You fall into step beside a barrel-shaped man named Wymond, who informs you in a tone of great seriousness that he once debated a bishop about whether saints fart in heaven. They do, he says, nodding to himself, but only the musical kind, like holy trumpets. You decide he's either a genius or has eaten far too many beans on this journey. Here's your historical fact. Relics were a cornerstone of medieval religious practice. Bones, teeth, robes, fingernails. If it touched a saint, it could end up in a gilded box and worshipped for centuries. Pilgrims would travel for weeks to glimpse or kiss such items, hoping for miracles, absolution, or at the very least, a break from the tedium of everyday survival. The most famous relics were tightly guarded, but even tiny village chapels claimed their share. Fingernails of obscure saints, handkerchiefs said to have wiped the brow of martyrs, and in one known case a feather allegedly from the Holy Spirit itself. Spoiler, probably a goose. As the sun climbs, the pilgrims begin singing again. This time it's a call and response hymn that involves clapping and accidental theology. One verse claims St. Cuthbert invented ale, another insists that angels carry soup spoons. You join in on the chorus because by now this madness is your normal. Wyman points out a crumbling stone marker near the roadside, weathered smooth except for the faint image of a boot. Pilgrim certain stone, he says, supposed to bring protection, or at least better weather. You touch it. Nothing happens, but your stomach does stop cramping for a few minutes, so maybe there's something to it. Then comes a hill. It doesn't look like much, a gentle slope, a nice view at the top maybe. But halfway up it becomes the enemy. Your thighs scream, your breath turns into fog, your shoes, which are still crusty from that time they were nailed to a post, begin to protest in earnest. You collapse dramatically on a patch of grass and decide that if a miracle doesn't descend immediately, you'll just live here now, maybe become a roadside prophet and charge a penny for vague advice. Here's your quirky fact. Some medieval pilgrims did exactly that. A few never made it to their destination, not because they died, but because they decided to stay somewhere along the way. Some set up roadside shrines, became hermits, or wandered between pilgrim routes like holy drifters, trading stories and services for food and drink. A few became local legends. Others were just forgotten, buried beside the roads they never left. Eventually, someone coaxes you back to your feet with the promise of fig bread, which turns out to be more bread than fig, and more dust than either. Still you eat it, because you're hungry and you're weak, and because fig bread at this point is just another part of the contract your body has signed without reading the fine print. You reach the chapel by mid-afternoon. It's a squat, lopsided structure nestled between two crumbling walls, with a bell that rings when the wind's in the mood. The priest waiting outside greets the pilgrims with an expression halfway between welcoming and utterly overwhelmed. Clearly he wasn't warned about the size or smell of your group. Inside, the chapel is small, cool and dimly lit. Candles flicker in alcoves, and there it is, the relic, displayed in a glass box. A single shriveled toe perched on a velvet cushion, surrounded by tiny dusty flowers and coins from half a dozen kingdoms. Someone kneels and weeps. Someone else sneezes on it. The priest sighs. You stare at the toe. The toe stares back. Here's the scholarly debate. Were relics actually believed in by everyone, or were they convenient tools of church power? Some historians argue that relics were central to popular devotion, deeply respected even by the illiterate and sceptical. Others suggest relics were sometimes exploited, sold, swapped, faked to increase the prestige and income of churches. Carbon dating and later testing revealed many relics were, in fact, from animals or completely unrelated humans. But to the average pilgrim, the miracle was in the hope, not the accuracy. You leave an offering, 2 copper pennies and a small drawing of a chicken for reasons you choose not to examine, and step back outside. The pilgrims are camped around the chapel now, sharing wine, trading stories and debating loudly about whether the toe looked more like a shriveled potato. You sit beside the fire and stretch your aching feet, which now feel less like feet and more like ancient relics of suffering themselves. Someone hands you a mug of warmed ale. It tastes faintly of cloves and shoe leather. The stars come out. Someone begins singing a lullaby. You stare into the flames and wonder how many other fools like you have walked this road, prayed to the same relics, and woken up beside the same goat. And you realise something strange. You're actually enjoying this. Or maybe that's just the ale talking. The next morning arrives without ceremony, just a sharp sunbeam slicing through your eyelids like a divine reprimand, and the unmistakable sensation of someone snoring directly into your ear. You sit up and discover the culprit. A pilgrim sprawled beside you, clutching a wine flask like it's a newborn. Around you, the rest of the campsite stirs slowly, with the grace and coordination of overturned sacks of potatoes. Feet emerge from blankets, someone groans about their spine, and someone else has lost a sandal and now blames a crow. It's the usual. Today the destination is a tavern. Not a shrine, not a chapel, not a sacred oak, but a full-blown, licensed, heresy-tolerant, moderately famous roadside tavern known as the Flaming Goose. You've heard of it even before the pilgrimage. Tales whispered in sticky tavern corners about its spiced cider, its chicken on a sword, and its notorious 3-mug challenge, which, according to legend, has only ever been completed twice. Once by a blind minstrel with no taste buds, and once by a nun in disguise. There is exactly one road between you and that tavern. It's dusty, long, and blessedly flat. Your group moves at a brisker pace than usual, inspired by the promise of beds with actual mattresses and mugs with mysterious liquids. The conversation drifts toward anticipation. What will the tavern be like? Will there be music, food, a competent cook, or will the stew once again taste like boiled remorse? Wymond walks beside you, already daydreaming aloud. I hear the barkeep can recite the 10 Commandments backwards, drunk, while balancing a spoon on his forehead. You nod solemnly. A true spiritual gift. And here's your historical fact. Taverns along pilgrimage routes were big business in the Middle Ages. Entire villages sprang up around these establishments, built to serve the endless tide of travellers. Pilgrims might start their journeys for pious reasons, but they rarely passed up a good tavern. Monks recorded complaints about pilgrims stopping to drink more often than they stopped to pray. Some taverns even catered to specific routes, with relic replicas and religious paraphernalia displayed alongside wine barrels and roast pork. The Flaming Goose appears on the horizon just past midday, rising like a holy vision. It's a large, timber-framed building with crooked windows, a carved goose sign hanging above the door, and the sound of badly tuned lute music leaking from within. Outside, a goat tied to the post eyes you with suspicious familiarity. You slow your steps. "Is that?" Wyman frowns. "Looks like your goat." "I don't have a goat." "You might," he says. The door creaks open, and you're greeted by the delicious, dangerous smells of roast onions, beer foam, and singed bread crusts. The inside of the goose is dark and warm, filled with pilgrims, travellers, and a man asleep under the table with a chicken perched on his head like a wig. The barkeep is a woman named Lever, tall and wide-shouldered, with a booming voice and the sharp eyes of someone who's seen 30 years of bad jokes and unpaid tabs. She sizes you all up, then grins. "Pilgrims, eh? You've got that feet full of blisters and hearts full of sin look." No one denies it. You slide onto a bench, mug already in hand, and drink something golden and spiced that makes your ears twitch. A plate of meat, possibly pork, possibly ambition, is dropped in front of you. You devour it like a man just returned from war. And here's your quirky fact. In some taverns, especially ones along popular routes, there were performance corners, where pilgrims could earn discounts on food and drink by telling stories, singing songs or confessing sins in rhymed verse. Some even competed in mock sermons, drunken theological debates where the most entertaining blasphemer was declared high drunkard for the night. After your third mug, Lever slaps the table. 3-mug challenge, she announces. "Who's fool enough?" You raise a hand. Wymond groans. "You would." She places 3 mugs before you. The first is steaming, spiced like mulled mystery. The second is cold, dark, and smells faintly of pine tar. The third is thick. You don't trust it. You drink anyway. The first mug burns going down but sings in your chest. The second makes your vision go sideways. The third, you're not sure. It tastes like syrup, regret, and the memory of something that never happened. You burp. It echoes through your soul. And here's the scholarly debate. Did medieval taverns encourage sin or simply reflect human nature? Some clergy condemned them as dens of temptation. Others accepted their role as necessary spaces of rest and social gathering. A few records describe priests drinking with pilgrims and using tavern talk as a chance for real confession. After all, a drunk man might speak truer than a sober one kneeling in church. Lever declares you the winner of the 3-mug challenge. You're not sure what you've won. Possibly indigestion, possibly enlightenment. She offers you a slice of bread and the tavern's ceremonial hat, a goose-shaped bonnet. You wear it proudly. That night, the Flaming Goose becomes a cathedral of chaos. Pilgrims sing ballads about toe bones and magical raisins. Someone recites a sonnet to a pickle jar. You tell a long, rambling story about the time you outdrank a friar and accidentally rewrote the Psalms to include a section on soup. You're pretty sure none of it's true, but no one's keeping score. Later, under the wooden beams and soft torchlight, someone plays a gentle melody on a cracked flute. People gather on the floor, heads resting on each other, wrapped in blankets and wine-sodden peace. Even the goat curls up at your feet, finally accepting your existence. You lie back and stare at the rafters, full of ale, roasted dreams, and the slow glowing warmth of shared exhaustion. The road waits beyond the door, but tonight there is no road. Just laughter, breath, and a tavern full of people who believe, at least for now, that drinking together is a form of prayer. You whisper to no one, "This is church enough," and someone murmurs back, "Amen." You wake up on a table, not at a table, on it. Face down, arms draped off either side like a medieval centerpiece no one wanted to eat. There's bread stuck to your cheek. It smells faintly of old time and last night's ambitions. You blink blearily at the ceiling beams above you, trying to remember how you ended up as part of the tavern's interior decor. Memory, of course, has decided not to clock in this morning. All you've got is the ghost of a goose hat and a vague sense that you might have proposed to a mug. Around you, the Flaming Goose is in full recovery mode. Broken mugs line the fireplace. Someone's trousers hang from a ceiling beam like a victory flag. Lever, the barkeep, stomps around with the energy of a woman who's seen it all and has no time for your nonsense. She catches your eye, raises one eyebrow, and tosses you a loaf of hard bread. "Eat that or die," she says. You chew obediently. It's like gnawing on regret. The pilgrims stir slowly, groaning, rolling over, crawling across the floor in search of shoes or salvation. Women finds his hat soaking in a puddle of ale and mutters something about divine punishment. Someone else tries to order breakfast and is handed a single raw turnip. It's unclear if that's intentional or just tavern justice. The plan for today: no shrines, no chapels, no hills, no toe bones. Today is market day in a nearby town, and for once the pilgrims have voted to travel not for salvation, but for resupply. Spirits, tools, possibly a clean tunic, and most importantly, more booze. Because the road doesn't walk itself, and apparently neither do the liver enzymes. You trudge out of the Goose with your companions, bags a little lighter, stomach slightly steadier, and dignity still MIA. The walk is mercifully short, the town nestled just beyond a line of trees, its wooden palisade lazily guarded by a man who waves at you with one hand while using the other, to scratch a place no one should scratch so enthusiastically in public. The market is chaos, glorious, shrieking, chicken-dodging chaos. Merchants shout over each other, like auctioneers with head colds. Spice sellers wave their cinnamon sticks like weapons. A woman tries to sell you a blessed eel. A boy offers you a pet beetle named Harold. You buy a hunk of cheese and immediately question your choices. It smells like it's plotting something. Here's your historical fact. Medieval markets were more than just places to buy food. They were the social and economic hubs of towns. On market days, travellers, pilgrims, thieves, minstrels, farmers, monks, and anyone with anything remotely tradeable all gathered in the square. Local laws were sometimes suspended during market hours to encourage trade. It was a mix of business, spectacle, and barely contained anarchy. You watch Wyman try to haggle with a woman over a bottle of green-tinted brandy labelled St. Hildegard's Elixir for Sins of the Lower Back. He claims to have back pain. She claims he has poor posture and worse taste. Somehow they settle on a price and he walks away victorious, swigging and wincing. Nearby, you notice a group of well-dressed men standing around a massive cart. On it, barrels, crates, and a sign that reads, "Licensed Spirits, Guild Approved." The men wear matching hats and smug expressions. Guilds, of course. Here's your quirky fact. As alcohol became big business in the Middle Ages, local brewing and distillation guilds formed to regulate quality, price, and trade. These guilds could wield incredible power, sometimes acting like booze mafias. If you weren't part of the guild, you couldn't legally sell your product, unless you had protection, or paid the right bribe, or worked far enough from any law that it didn't matter. You approach the guild cart out of curiosity. A man with a curly moustache and too many rings on his fingers greets you. "Interested in quality drink, friend?" he asks, clearly trying to decide if you're a paying customer or a vagrant who wandered in from a cabbage field. You ask what makes their drink so special. He launches into a speech about triple-filtered barley mash, imported elderflower, and yeast that's been blessed by a monk who allegedly once shook hands with a bishop who allegedly saw St. Bridget in a puddle. You nod slowly, backing away before your wallet gets exercised. "Back near the tavern," Wimond mutters darkly. "These guild types are killing a real drink. You used to be able to buy a flagon of honey wine from old Martyr's porch and it'd put you on the moon. Now you get elderflower." He spits the word like it offended his ancestors. He has a point. Guilds standardised brewing, yes, but they also stamped out local flavours. Secret recipes, backyard stills, questionable family liquors, all slowly pushed aside by licensed, tax-friendly, guild-certified beverages. The pilgrims you travel with? Most of them smuggle a flask made by someone who never signed a single guild charter. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the rise of alcohol guilds protect the public from dangerous drinks or ruin cultural diversity? Some historians say regulation was necessary. Unregulated booze could and did kill people. Others argue guilds were monopolies in fancy hats, restricting tradition, inflating prices, and crushing the creativity of peasant fermenters and women brewers who operated outside the system. Back at the Goose, a merchant arrives with his own stock, unlicensed cider, apple pear mash, and something he calls sleep wine, which, he warns, should be consumed in a safe location with minimal sharp objects nearby. You and a few others crowd around. His cider tastes like freedom and mild hallucinations. He hands you a bottle wrapped in cloth and whispers, "No guild mark. Keep it low." You do. Later that night, you gather in the Goose's back room, candles flickering, mugs passed around in secret. You taste plum brandy thick as syrup and a dark cherry wine that makes your eyelids flutter. Wymond pulls out a flask from his boot. Boot brandy, he calls it, aged by miles and sheer foot heat. You're drunk, warm, spinning slightly. You sit back and watch your fellow travellers tell stories and argue about saints again. Someone sings, someone cries. A small debate breaks out over whether the Flaming Goose is the best tavern or merely the holiest. You lean your head back against the wall and think of all the unnamed, unlicensed, possibly illegal drinks that have passed through your mouth this week. Each one tells a story the guilds can't bottle, and for the first time you realise you've started to care. You raise your mug to the ceiling and toast. To the boot brewers, the porch fermenters, the tavern rebels, long may their flavours burn. Someone clinks your cup. The goat bleats in approval. You wake in the Goose's storeroom this time, head resting on a burlap sack full of lentils and dreams. The floor creaks beneath you as the building breathes in early morning light, and someone nearby is humming a funeral dirge like it's a lullaby. You're not dead, but you're definitely not entirely alive either, caught in that squishy middle space where your brain is soup and your soul has stepped out for air. Your tongue is coated in something that tastes like roasted regret. You sit up slowly, very aware of every ache and bruise your body has collected over the last few weeks. Today's the last day of the pilgrimage. Not because you've reached your holy destination, honestly, you're not even sure what that was supposed to be anymore, but because people are starting to peel off, one by one, returning to their own villages, families, or other roads entirely. The pilgrimage, like any good bender, doesn't really end, it just sort of dissolves. Wymond, ever the philosopher, is sitting in the corner, polishing his walking stick with a rag that's definitely someone's lost sock. He nods as you rise. "We've drunk our way across half the country," he says, "and I still don't know your name." You pause. "Neither do I," you reply. "Let's keep it that way." He grins and raises a flask in salute. "To the mystery." Out in the tavern's main room, the final breakfast is underway. It's a chaotic mix of leftover stew, suspicious sausages, and day-old bread that might qualify as a blunt weapon. Pilgrims sit shoulder to shoulder, sharing stories for the 100th time, laughing too loudly or just staring into space, eyes glazed over in a kind of ale-induced transcendence. And here's your historical fact. The end of a pilgrimage was often as spiritually significant as the beginning. Pilgrims were sometimes blessed by local priests, given tokens of completion, a seashell, a badge, a patch, and offered one last confession before rejoining the sinful grind of normal life. Taverns became unofficial temples for these farewells, half party, half spiritual detox. Lever, the barkeep, rings a bell and gives a short, scathing speech. To those of you who didn't burn the place down, thank you. Those who did steal all the clean linens, I hope your feet blister and your ale turns sour. Now drink something before I throw you out. Someone raises a mug and shouts, "To the Goose!" Everyone answers, "To the Goose!" You drink with them, because how could you not? It's part of the ritual. Last morning, last mug, and you find a quiet corner afterward to sort through your belongings, now reduced to a tangled mess of clothing, a wooden spoon, a mostly empty coin pouch, and one very powerful hangover. You also find the strange red dye from the blackout night still tucked into your bag. You roll it in your hand, the sun symbol is still there. You don't remember how you got it. You probably never will. People begin to say their goodbyes. The woman who sang lullabies every night hugs you without warning. The kid who thought his beetle was sacred gives you a pebble and tells you it's good luck if you spit on it first. You do. It's disgusting. You smile anyway. Here's your quirky fact. Some pilgrims, despite the hardship of the road, never returned home. Instead, they found new villages, new communities, even new identities. Pilgrimage wasn't just a physical journey, it was a reset button. If you survived it, you could be someone else. A merchant becomes a mystic. A thief becomes a preacher. A drunk becomes a legend. You and Wymond step outside together, the morning air crisp and honest. The dirt road stretches in two directions, back toward the familiar, or forward into whatever's next. Wymond stares into the sky and says, "Well, my debts are waiting back home. Time to go make bad decisions somewhere respectable." You nod. "I might keep walking." He claps you on the shoulder. "Don't die, or if you do, make it interesting." You part ways there. He turns left, whistling off key. You turn right, not sure where you're headed. Maybe there's another village, maybe another tavern, maybe just more road. Your feet are sore, your liver's tired, and you haven't washed in days, but you feel somehow lighter, hollowed out in a good way, like the nonsense burned away something heavy and left behind something truer. Here comes the scholarly debate. Was medieval drinking culture a form of slow societal collapse, or a survival mechanism? Some argue the constant inebriation dulled minds and fed superstition. Others believe it was a vital outlet for stress and trauma, a communal therapy session disguised as a drinking game. The truth, as always, probably lives in the tension between both. You reach a ridge just outside town and look back one last time. The Flaming Goose sits crooked on the horizon, smoke curling from its chimney, the faint sound of laughter still echoing from its beams. The goat is sitting on the roof. Of course it is. You keep walking. A mile or two later you pass a roadside shrine. No toe bones this time, just a carving of a saint who looks suspiciously hungover. You stop and leave your red dye on the stone shelf beneath it. A parting gift, a little mystery for the next traveller. By midday you've found another path, another village, another cluster of voices calling out from a courtyard tavern. The sign overhead reads The Whistling Duck. Someone's already singing. Someone else is arguing about whether dreams mean anything. A pitcher sloshes on a table. Someone shouts, "Come drink, stranger." You pause at the threshold just long enough to grin. Then you walk in, because this story doesn't end here, it just refills. And now, with your cup finally empty and your feet aching from miles of wandering, it's time to settle in and let the echoes of medieval mischief fade into the quiet hum of your room. Maybe you're lying back now, tucked under the covers, one hand behind your head, the other clutching a metaphorical goblet. Or maybe just your phone, letting the weight of old stone taverns, crusty bread, and questionable wines roll off your shoulders. You've staggered through the ages with brewers and barmaids, monks and misfits, farmers and fools. You've blacked out under the stars, argued the meaning of dreams over firelight, and toasted saints whose names might have been invented just to rhyme with ale. You've seen that getting wasted in medieval times wasn't just about drink, it was about surviving, about squeezing joy from a hard, uncertain life, and maybe, just maybe, finding communion not through prayer alone, but through laughter, music, and the tilt of a mug shared between strangers. In those flickering candlelit halls and smoky roadside inns, you witnessed something tender, chaotic, and weirdly wise, a community of people who refused to let war, plague, poverty, or politics keep them from singing badly and living fully. Maybe they didn't know all the answers, but they sure knew how to ask them over ale between burps with their feet on the table and their hearts still cracked open. So now, as you dim the lights, or maybe just close your eyes, and let the last echoes of lutes and drunken philosophy fade, remember this. History isn't just kings and battles. It's the spilled wine, the sore feet, and the ridiculous hats. And if your dreams tonight happen to feature goats in clergy robes or a spectral barmaid offering you another round, just smile, roll over, and mutter, "To the goose, sleep tight, wanderer."